Chapter 1. Summary. Like the shortest chapter. Chapter text. It was supposed to be her day off. But no, there just had to be a hostage situation on the one day she had off this month. Kazemi was going to make sure this villain got what was coming's, ruining her day off. Kazemi frowned as she heard more about the situation. Apparently, a teenager was the hostage, and his quirk had caused several fires. She suddenly saw why they asked her to come by, and not just because she was in the area. Her childish thoughts about getting petty vengeance on the villain who ruined her vacation changed to righteous fury about the innocent life put in danger. Kazemi whipped out streams of water as she put a hand to her earpiece. She jumped on as the pressure built up, just enough for her to have something solid to stand on. It was a good thing she wore her usual boots that day. She'd hate to ruin her socks. "I'm on my way, ETA 2 minutes, she said, twisting her hand in a way that caused the water to move. She preferred English with her agency dispatcher, much to the latter's relief. It saved them time when relaying messages, not having to translate for even a moment. Kazemi went flying, and she heard the situation before she saw it. An explosion quirk, she thought. She landed on a nearby roof, peering down. The scene was a disaster, fires everywhere, cars overturned, and a mass of moving slime was at the center. Wait, the slime was moving around something. That had to be the hostage. The newer hero Kamui Woods was on the scene, and fellow water hero Backdraft. She'd met the latter once, but he seemed scared of her, so she never bothered to keep in contact with him. He seemed to be putting his strategy training to good use, letting other heroes deal with the hostage while he did what his quirk was made for, controlling the blazes. The problem was that the other heroes on the scene all seemed to be thinking the same thing. Kamui was pulling civilians from the flames, which made sense, but couldn't he try and do the same with the hostage? Actually, that would make more sense, given that he's made of wood and fire doesn't mix with wood, whereas with the slime Kazemi had to snap herself out of her analysis. Although it was accurate, her focus would have to be saving the hostage, not what the other heroes did wrong. Death Arms seemed to have given up on pulling the kid out of danger. Oh God. The villain is made of slime. The kid is drowning. Kazemi compartmentalized, putting aside both her horror and her annoyance. Kazemi figured the pro was scared of the kid's quirk, which would be reasonable if the kid was the combatant. But the slime person who was taking up most of the block was the real threat. A little burning would be worth it if the kid got to safety, and would probably look good for the press if he was concerned about that. Kazemi noticed that the villain's eyes and teeth were oddly prominent. I bet that's the Slimer's weak points, seeing as that's the most human part of them. Kazemi scowled as she noticed the other hero who'd arrived. Some new one she hadn't heard about. Also did nothing to help. With a quirk that makes you that big, I get having a hard time with small streets, but you have arms. You can stretch, can't you? Who granted you a license? Who granted any of you licenses? Kazemi pushed aside her thoughts again, preparing to snipe the villain's weak points. After the bad guy was caught off guard, she'd blast the hostage's chest. Hopefully, she'd hit him with enough force to act as CPR and clear his lungs. The hostage probably couldn't last much longer, and even if he could, Kazemi didn't want to risk it. Kazemi wished she asked for information on how long this had been going on. Then she'd have a better estimate on how long she could plan. During her brief analysis, Kazemi had an idle thought, a sentence repeating in the back of her mind. If the kid dies, I'll have their licenses for lunch. She knew that she was just as bad as them, waiting as long as she did, but she had to think to come up with an efficient method of rescue. Also, they could have easily used their quirks to try and rescue the kid, and trying was better than just letting him die. I think I can avoid skinning the boy, and maybe knock some slime off the outside too. Once I fire, I'll jump down on another stream and ride in for the full rescue. Kazemi was snapped out of her musings by someone breaking through the barriers around the scene, even though 3 pros were supposedly on crowd control. Okay, Backdraft was controlling the fires, but still. He was also helping with crowd control. Water heroes with hydrokinesis had to be good at multitasking in order to properly control their quirk. Okay, Now I'm really going to eat their licenses. They let a civilian get through like that? Kazemi cursed under her breath after she realized that the one who broke through was another teenager. Kazemi jumped before thinking, summoning a stream to ride down. Calculated strategy was out the window. 2 kids were in danger now. Kazemi was readying another stream, but then the second kid threw his goddamn backpack and nailed the Slimer in the eye. Kazemi nearly stopped midair from the shock, but she shook it off. The kid may have been reckless, but he was smart. The green-haired second kid was now pulling slime away from the hostage's mouth. A smart move, giving the kid a better chance at fighting. Kazemi sent out a small stream, sending it as fast as she could. She increased its temperature and sent it into the villain's left eye, trying to buy the kids some time. The explosive one started using his quirk on the slime with renewed vigor. Kazemi shot her second stream out, blasting the kids away from the villain. At the same time, she summoned a giant wave, borrowing some water from Backdraft's quirk. She sent the water to wash the kids away, towards the other heroes. Kazemi drew the water back in towards her, creating a high-pressure shield in front of her as the villain lunged at her. Some of it evaporated from how fast she moved it, but she needed the shield to be there more than she needed it to be big. She pulled more of Backdraft's water towards her with her free hand, glancing at the kids behind her. They seemed safe. Kazemi found that a part of her brain was hyper-focused on the green one. She wondered if she'd finally found someone like her, someone who could plot out the most efficient plan mid-battle. Even if he wasn't like that, Kazemi figured he had the instincts for battle and could be trained to be as good as her. Perhaps better. She had to talk to that kid after this was over. Kazemi grinned from behind her shield, looking feral. She felt an opportunity before her, something exciting, something new. She had a fight to win too, and that was just as exhilarating. The slime villain couldn't see it through the water, but nevertheless, he felt a chill. He barely noticed it, and it didn't slow him down, but it was there. Kazemi had a plan, and while it would push her current fighting style to the limits, it was effective, efficient, emblematic of her approach to life. Kazemi's mismatched eyes gleamed as she pulled water towards her, some of it seeming to pop into existence. That would be because it did, of course, but no one could tell except for her. Well, maybe Nedzu could, but he knew Kazemi's secrets. If he didn't, he would have a much harder time noticing when the laws of physics seemed to subtly break around her. Kazemi reigned in her excitement as she twisted the water to create a spinning bubble. The green-haired kid who had her interest would have to wait. The slime villain was the concern. Kazemi already knew that today she met one of the next generation's heroes. Now it was only a question of whether or not she got to help him get there. Chapter 2. Chapter text. Midoriya Izuku knew he screwed up the moment he grabbed onto All Might's leg, but he had to know. He had to know if it was possible to become a hero without a quirk. Or at least if someone else thought it might be. Of course, he didn't mean to learn a national secret about the number 1 hero, but still, All Might had been the most comforting thing in his life, had been his comfort since he was little. When he first learned what the word hero meant, he supposed maybe his obsession was unhealthy, had set him up for his dreams to be crushed, but damn it, All Might was who know what made him feel better when Kaken picked on him. Called him worthless. Maybe he put the man on too high a pedestal, even for the symbol of peace. Izuku didn't know anymore. A chilling numbness had settled into his brain as he tried to process everything that had happened. Of course, if someone could hurt the number 1 hero like that, then perhaps All Might was just trying to keep him safe. It was the logical conclusion, but his dreams had been defying reason for so long. Not the common knowledge that quirkless meant weak, the stupid prejudice society had. No, that was not the reason being defied. If everyone around you declared your dreams impossible, even your own mother, it became even more unreasonable to cling to them. And so, Izuku decided to give up to the numbness in his head. He began to wander, letting his body move on its own. To his surprise, he stumbled into the villain attack he saw from the top of the building earlier and, out of habit, stopped to watch. The numbness started to crack when he realized that it was the slime villain who All Might had saved him from. His thoughts started to spiral in the background, like a whirlpool underneath a frozen sea. Oh God, the villain got away because he distracted All Might midair, and now more heroes had to fight because of him. Wait, the slime villain had just tried to drown him, to use him as a hiding place. So why were there fires? A hero's quirk? Izuku examined the heroes on the scene and knew none of them had a quirk that could cause fires. Izuku realized the cause of the fires with a growing sense of horror as he overheard some civilians commentating on the situation. Oh no, the villain must have had another hostage, someone else was drowning like he was, and it was all his fault. An explosion caught his attention. Izuku realized he knew exactly who caused the fires. It was Kaken. The numbness that had frozen his mind completely shattered with the force of his emotional whirlpool. He started moving, pushing past the police and heroes and barricades. He had to save him. He couldn't stop moving, but his head started working. Okay, you're running, but now what? How do you plan to survive? Izuku vaguely heard people calling for him to come back, but he tuned them out. He remembered some strategies he wrote in his notebook and remembered from his earlier experience the villain was weak in the eyes. He took off his backpack, unzipping it slightly, and threw it. The villain recoiled in shock and rage after something. Maybe a notebook, hit it in the eye, but Izuku didn't have time to process it. Kaken needed to breathe, and the villain drew back enough to allow it. Izuku was close enough now. He could feel the heat from Kaken's explosions as he tore the slime from the blonde. Kaken! Izuku cried out. What the hell? Why are you here? I don't know. My legs. They just started moving. Kaken yelled as the slime monster recovered, trying to suffocate him again. As Izuku tore at the slime, he thought about everything that had happened to him so far. The doctor telling him the bad news, his mother crying and wishing things were different, the bullying at school, what All Might said. Then it hit him. He knew exactly what he was doing. Living up to the ideal hero, someone who strives to protect innocent life at all costs. Kaken? Izuku said, choking back tears. I couldn't just stand there and watch you die. Get the hell off me, Kaken yelled, although whether it was at him or the slime villain Izuku didn't know. And then the water hit him. Chapter 3. Izuku stared at the woman in the slime with awe. She has such a cool quirk. How can she control that much water at once? Oh holy smokes, she's adding more water. Is she drawing in water vapor from the surrounding area, or did she have water already on her? Wait, I recognize that quirk. Izuku began fanboying internally. He couldn't believe his luck. One of the coolest heroes around had just saved him. She wouldn't have had to save anyone if you hadn't bothered All Might. Izuku tried to ignore that thought, but it was no use. Then a more worrying thought. She's not wearing her hero costume, and this is outside her normal patrol area. Izuku realized with a growing sense of horror that the woman now shielding herself from sentient slime was supposed to be taking the day off. Kazemi was blissfully unaware of the mild panic attack she inadvertently caused. She had enough water for her plan now. The bubble around her was no longer a bubble. It was a solid mass of water. It was also getting uncomfortable to keep it in such a highly pressurized state against her skin. Kazemi figured the feeling was the sign to go ahead and begin. The water around her exploded with a flick of her wrist. The villain screamed as water tore through him. The slime was being spread out. Izuku watched, fascinated. She's using the water from her shield as an attack, highly pressurized streams mixing with the slime, but moving independently of it. She's so cool. Kazemi had more space to move her hands now. Time for phase 2, she thought. The water she used to push the villain away from her began moving in response as she began to whip the villain around. Well, not exactly. She was breaking the villain apart and mixing them up. The goal was to disorient them and fatigue them. Kazemi also sent a blast of water out to encircle the villain's face. She sent that off to the side. Within a minute, the villain was exhausted from his body being torn apart, churning in a dozen different streams of water. With that, Kazemi let her water dissipate. Backdraft had taken care of the fires Kazemi hadn't put out during the fight. Izuku, meanwhile, was being looked over by a paramedic. Well, more like being ignored by a paramedic. That made sense. Kakin had been drowning in slime and might have overused his quirk. He needed medical attention more. What didn't make sense was what the water hero was doing. "Thank you for your patience, but now is not the time for the public," Kazemi shouted. She was regretting letting her water go now. "There will be a statement after the cleanup is over." With a wave of her hand, she called the water back. She created a screen between the public and the scene, a giant wall of water surrounding the block. She made sure the water foamed enough to give them some privacy. The police on scene began moving around, assessing the area. Kazemi let her cheerful facade drop. In her excitement over an interesting battle and an interesting teenager, she nearly forgot about the heroes who had nearly let another teenager die. She turned around to glower at the heroes, minus that one who grew to supersize earlier. Kazemi guessed the water barrier was keeping her out. No matter, Kazemi would chew her out privately later. Backdraft was the only one who reacted, taking a step back. The rest seemed not to recognize her. Kazemi fought back a sadistic grin. She would enjoy the looks on their faces when they realized. "I can't believe I had to step in. The hostage should have been rescued long before the situation escalated this extreme." Kazemi gestured at the teenagers off to the side. "The green one had the right idea, although he forced me to act faster than I planned. He was reckless, but he made the right call. More importantly, he made a call that any one of you could have made." The heroes, save for Backdraft, took this information with a mixture of indignation and outrage. A hero she barely paid attention to earlier, one that seemed baseball-themed, spoke up, almost sneering. "And you are you to decide that? You're not even in uniform, you're probably a vigilante." Backdraft recoiled in fear as Kazemi released her unnerving grin. Before she could say anything, she was cut off by another voice. "You mean you didn't recognize her quirk? No way. That's Hurricane." Kazemi found herself delighted that she had a voice to match to the green child, who on closer inspection was both kind of plain-looking and kind of adorable. His voice was soft, but he sounded excited. Kazemi's grin grew unnaturally wider. "Well, I don't normally get recognized out of costume, but then again, I don't normally take down villains on my day off either," Kazemi said, putting a hand on the back of her neck. "Always nice to meet a fan, especially when they're as smart as you." Izuku still couldn't believe this was his life. He was just complimented by one of the greatest international heroes twice. And today he learned that Hurricane had heterochromia. That's such a neat thing. Was it related to her quirk? It had to be. One was pale blue and the other was pale green. Both are colors associated with water. Her silver hair, on the other hand, that probably wasn't related, but it looked cool. While Izuku fanboyed, the heroes looked slightly unnerved. Kazemi pulled out her hero license for the others to inspect, grateful that she never left home without it. Kamui Woods spoke up. "With all due respect, Hurricane, what do you think we could have done differently?" Kazemi looked them over, then locked eyes with Kamui. "Well, I'll be honest, I don't recognize all of you, meaning I don't know that much about your quirks. Kamui, you asked first, so I'll start with you. I understand that fire is a weakness of yours, but slime isn't. You could have pulled the blonde out. I think we can chalk this mistake up to your relative inexperience, given the fact that you haven't even been pro that long." Backdraft. Kazemi leveled her gaze on the fire department hero. Backdraft shuddered involuntarily. "I'm honestly more disappointed that you let a civilian get through. You and I both know that hydrokinesis requires divided focus and better than average multitasking. I understand why you felt a need to focus on the fires though, given your specialty." Backdraft sighed aloud. He was expecting a far more scathing response. Kazemi rolled her neck. "That growing hero, the one I locked out with my water screen, she could have leaned in from the end of the block to grab the hostage, or maybe shrunk back down to get in close before growing again. I'll chew her out later. Death Arms, you may not have been able to subdue the villain, but you should have been able to pull the hostage from his clutches. Takedowns are important, but innocent life should always take priority." The baseball hero spoke up again, clearly unnerved. But none of us had the right quirks for combat dash. Kazemi growled. The baseball hero stopped. What's your hero name? Kazemi said, glowering. Backdraft began questioning everything in his life and wondered what he did to deserve this. Perhaps it was something in his past life? Well, better to be on the good side of the angry storm. That's Slugger, Hurricane, Backdraft said. Slugger looked at Backdraft with a hint of betrayal but turned back to Hurricane once she started speaking. Slugger, I suggest you rethink your approach to heroing and get your hearing checked. I literally just said the priority should always be rescue. Has no one ever told you that? Have any one of you ever been told that? Backdraft coughed. Hurricane rolled her eyes. The rest of the heroes looked somewhat cowed. The blonde is lucky I was here, but the fact is a green-haired teenager did the job better than all of you put together. Privately, Kazemi wondered if that was natural. His hair was curly, and curly hair didn't always take well to dye. Yeah. How did you do that, kid? Death Arms said as all of the heroes looked at the teenagers. You got some kind of analysis quirk? Izuku panicked, fidgeting with his shirt hem. Oh, well dash. Deku? Don't make me laugh, the blonde yelled. Izuku took in a deep breath, steeling himself. Here it comes. He's quirkless. Chapter 4. The heroes stopped looking at the kid with wonder and with outrage and shock. Kazemi decided that her earlier half-jests about eating licenses for lunch were going to have to be serious. Did they also forget their basic victim counseling? At least Backdraft was still scared of her, so he'd be quiet. She never thought she'd be thankful for her ability to terrify even people she liked. But here she was. You ran in there without a quirk for protection? What on earth were you thinking? Death Arms yelled. Before anyone could say anything, Death Arms was doused with ice-cold water. Kazemi was actually angry. Backdraft very consciously put Kamui Woods between him and the angry force of nature with hydrokinesis strong enough to rip him limb from limb. He figured the wooden hero would be more resistant to murder by water. Why don't we ask the kid calmly before we decide whether or not to chew him out? He might have had a good reason, and although he made the decision to step in, he is still very much a victim of this attack, Kazemi said, her voice eerily calm, which was a stark contrast to the high-pressure stream of water that spiraled rapidly around her arm. Even witnessing a life-threatening situation like that can be overwhelming for someone. Don't tell me that you've all forgotten Victim Counseling 101. Backdraft knew she wasn't actually trying to threaten them, that she used that water thing as a grounding technique to keep her from losing her temper, but it was still scary. He was seriously regretting his decision to host the rescue seminar he met her at. And despite calling her Decker during the seminar and seeing her practically melt over a cat, he never stopped thinking of her as Hurricane, the pro-hero with a temper to rival the force of her namesake. That said, he will vehemently deny whimpering a little bit when she asked them about victim counseling. And he most definitely did not shrink further behind Kamui. He was a professional with standards, and even if he let his guard down a bit outside of combat and rescue operations, he still kept to his standards. Thank you very much. Kamui Woods was later bribed with a month's supply of high-fiber granola bars. They even had little chocolate chips. Thankfully, he was the only one in hearing range. Kazemi knew Backdraft was scared of her. She knew, but she didn't know it was this bad. She'd send him some flowers or a gift card or something later. It was pathetic that she considered the man to be something of a friend given how little they talked, but she had always had the irrational urge to be a people-pleaser. Backdraft wasn't a dick, and she had had at least one in-depth conversation with him, so she felt she could safely give in to that urge. Later, when she wasn't close to murdering other pro-heroes who were incompetent enough to almost let a kid die. Izuku noticed the way the other heroes seemed to react to Hurricane's defense of him. He couldn't believe that, by the way, that someone so highly respected in pro-heroics was defending him, even though she knew he was quirkless. That she was angry at other heroes on his behalf. That said, he wondered why Backdraft was especially scared of her, yet seemed to know her personally. It was extra strange because Hurricane didn't seem to be particularly mad at him. If anything, she was less angry at Backdraft than the others. pro-hero drama was often reported in the tabloids, so it was strange that he never heard of a feud like this. And while he heard the Hurricane was harsh with other heroes, it still didn't make sense for them to be that scared of her. Then again, maybe she'd never been this angry at pro-heroes before. And she did look kind of threatening with the water spiraling around her arm. Katsuki was in shock. The hero, Hurricane, he'd barely heard of her, he'd have to learn more about her later, was defending Deku, and she definitely knew he was quirkless. In fact, she was kind of ignoring Katsuki. Pissed him off too. Fine then, he'd track down Hurricane later and make her see how great he was. She'd forget all about Deku. Barely a moment passed before Izuku spoke up. Well, I noticed that the slime was hard to grab, but his face was still sort of human, so it had to be vulnerable. I think I got a bit lucky with one of my notebooks hitting him in the eye, but I was aiming for the face on purpose. I just wanted to pull Kaken out. Izuku inhaled deeply, tears beginning to fall, but his voice grew steadier. I couldn't just stand there and watch him die. I was attacked by that villain earlier. He wanted to use me as a meat suit. That's what he said. And before I realized it was Kaken, I knew that the fires meant someone else had to be drowning like I was. When I saw it was him, my legs kind of moved on their own. I came up with my plan when I was about halfway to Kaken. The hero's eyes widened. Some of them even gasped. Even Hurricane seemed a little surprised. "How'd you get away from the slime villain then?" Kaken yelled. "I couldn't do that, and I'm way stronger than you." Izuku swallowed. I didn't. He was gonna have to lie for now. Since he was already emotionally exhausted, the heroes probably wouldn't press him too hard. All Might saved me A and B because I was knocked out by the P-punch. He had to STSTI behind and Emma make sure I was okay. WHWH, which means it's my fault that the villain got Kaken and All Might's Probabally still low looking for the villain in the sewers. It took everything he had not to begin full-on sobbing after that, after recounting what led to his dreams being crushed. His tears may have started flowing faster though. Kazemi whirled on the other heroes, water spiraling around her torso and head on instinct. My God. You were about to yell at the poor kid after he'd nearly died twice today. Twice. One of which was no fault of his own. No wonder he felt like he had to act. He's probably still traumatized from earlier. Not to mention you nearly let the other one die. I feel like I haven't quite yelled about that enough. If I hadn't shown up or the green kid hadn't done something, the blonde could have died. None of you were even trying to save the kid. And you were going to yell at the green one for something well beyond his control. Something he's probably made fun of for by his peers. And don't tell me he's not. You're an idiot if you ignore the quirkless statistics in this country. And for what? Because you're embarrassed that he did what you've all been trained to do. Kazemi took a deep breath and pulled some of her water back into hiding. Newsflash, fuckers. A quirk is just a tool. Nothing more. Nothing less. It may be your most powerful tool, but it's just something else you can use. If you thought your quirk was wrong for the situation, you're relying too much on it, treating it like the be-all end-all. More dangerously, you're treating every villain attack like the priority is the takedown. That is a dangerous line of thinking in this line of work, and especially in a hostage situation, and is what gets innocent people killed. Never make that mistake again, if you're lucky enough to still have your license after this. I'll be talking with the Hero Commission about the horrific mistakes you've all made today. I was here and can fact-check everything you say, so be honest in the incident reports, even though I shouldn't have to tell you that, given it's a crime. Kazemi turned around and went over to the two teenagers, who were watching with wide eyes. She crouched down, getting to about eye level with the two teenagers. "Hey, how are you two holding up?" she said, her voice a lot calmer. Izuku did his best to smile at her. "I'm better now. Thank you for all the nice things you said about me." Kazemi felt her heart stutter. This kid was somehow activating all her maternal instincts and she didn't know why. She guessed it was the freckles. "Well, I'm rarely wrong when it comes to judges of character. You were reckless, but I can't fault you too much for acting. While I logically know things would have been fine, your actions ultimately did not hurt the situation and inspired me to act faster." Izuku beamed, tears streaming down his face. TT, thank you. He stared straight at the blonde. And you? How are you? Have the paramedics cleared you to go? The blonde made a sking sound. Kazemi had a sinking feeling about that noise. I'll be fine. The paramedics cleared me. Kazemi nodded. Okay. Do either of you want to see a therapist? Katsuki exploded. Well, not literally, he wasn't stupid, but he did lose his temper. Who was she to talk to him like that? Do I look like some shitty victim to you? I don't need any help. Kazemi blinked, unfazed. Sorry, I'm used to complying with Canadian law. It's standard there to offer therapy to all civilians involved in hero work, and my work in Canada is when I'm most often in contact with civilians. The green one nodded, sniffling. That's right. You're one of the few heroes to work in more than 2 countries regularly, although you focus on rescue work when you journey to Canada. Kazemi nodded. That's a surprising level of insight for a Japanese fan of mine. You guys tend to focus on my combat work, although I do deal with natural disasters here in the fall. That said, my Japanese agency does have information on access to therapists on the website. She looked at the blonde. Think about it. Okay? Needing therapy doesn't make you weak. If anything, it makes you strong. I know for a fact All Might goes to therapy. He doesn't go as often as he should, but he does. Kazemi decided it best to leave out that Gran Torino and Sir had basically dragged him kicking and screaming to the first session, but he went willingly every other time. In fact, she was pretty sure he went on his own now, after the split with his sidekick. She hadn't spoken to All Might in a few years, but she still had a surprising level of insight into the man. Neither were the type to change much after all. The blonde with red eyes looked away from her, but Kazemi considered it a win that he didn't snap at her again. She stood back up. All right, you two, you'll have to give statements to the police, but after cleanup, you're free to go. I recommend you run for it before the media shows up. They're a pain to deal with, especially after your first villain attack. The green one nodded vigorously, whereas the blonde remained still. By the way, what's your name? The blonde turned his head again, while the green one immediately became flustered, starting to look like a strawberry. Oh no, really? I'm perfectly fine, you don't have to dash. Kazemi held up her hand. I'm curious, kids. Both of you have some serious potential. And despite being faced with impossible odds, both of you managed to hold your own against that slime guy, which bought you valuable time. Both of you had to be saved, of course, but you're kids and we're pros. This is what we do. Or at least, Kazemi scowled. What we should do. I'm afraid this might not be the last you two will hear about this incident. I'll try my best to minimize your involvement, but all of those heroes are going to come under heavy fire. With any luck, your police statements will be enough for the court. Regardless, I'd like to offer to pay for lawyers, just in case. The blonde stood up. I don't need your help. He stormed off, asked him officer something, and then followed the officer off. Kazemi watched him walk away, keeping her expression carefully blank. You called him Kakin, she said suddenly. Ha! The greenette started. You called him Kakin, she said again. That implies you know him well, but he was hostile towards you, so I hesitate you call you friends. Oh, that's just how he is. Kakin's always been like that, he replied, waving his hand somewhat dismissively. Kazemi pursed her lips. She decided maybe it was best to keep her concerns to herself. She stood up straight and offered out a hand to the kid before her. He took it and stood up as well. Let's get you to an officer. By the way, you still haven't answered my question. Huh? Oh, I'm Midoriya Izuku. Kazemi smiled at him softly. Deku Kazemi. Come on, kid. She started tugging him along. Chapter 5. Chapter text. Thank you very much, Officer Sansa, Kazemi said. Midoriya had just finished giving the police his statement and seemed significantly calmer than earlier. It seemed that talking through the experience helped him cope. Kazemi also knew that something seemed a little fishy with the part of the story where All Might took care of him, but given the potentially sensitive nature, Kazemi didn't want to push it. She could grill the kid later herself. She did suspect that All Might had let his secret slip, but Midoriya seemed like a good kid, and he'd lied about it so far. The Catman snapped his notebook closed. Just doing my job, Hurricane. Kazemi smiled. She glanced at the kid Midoriya. His name is Midoriya, she reminded herself, and leaned in towards Sansa. Who's the person I should talk to about the press statement? I want the kids kept out of the media firestorm we've got coming. Sansa smiled back at her. You're in luck. You're already speaking with him. Kazemi nodded. Before I go any further, Midoriya, would you like me to walk you home? The kid turned bright red yet again. Oh, you really don't have to dash. Kazemi cleared her throat. The kid stopped. I'm offering because as much as I respect good journalists, I know how the bad ones are. I've had a lot of practice being scary and it's my day off anyway. I'd rather spend it walking a kid home than dealing with the media on purpose. Privately, it was also because she was overcome by the irrational urge to wrap this kid in bubble wrap while at the same time she wanted to see him fight God and win. Not literally on either count, of course, she wasn't completely insane, but something about this kid had her interest, discounting what he did against the slime villain. And if he managed to wander into the slime guy twice in one day, Kazemi figured he would need a pro hero watching over him on his way home. Midoriya nodded, his face slowly returning to a normal hue. Kazemi framed it as a mutually beneficial transaction, and as she had guessed, the logic behind it made the kid feel less flustered about it. I would be honored, Hurricane-san. Kazemi shook her head. Call me Decker. If you call me Hurricane, it might draw attention. Oh, of course, Decker-san, he replied, his face starting to turn red again. Thankfully, it stopped at a lighter shade than earlier. So formal, Kazemi thought. She looked back at Officer Sansa, scratching idly at a spot on her palm. Now that I know I will not be giving a press statement, I'd like to request the police say some things on my behalf. Sansa nodded, opening his notepad back up. Kazemi inhaled deeply, preparing for her word vomit. First of all, they'll want confirmation that this was the same guy All Might was chasing earlier. Based on my analysis and Midoriya's testimony, we can safely conclude that to be the case. If anyone asks why he got away from All Might, point out in the response that All Might prioritized victim care over the takedown, as all pros should. I would avoid directly confirming that Midoriya was the one he saved the first time. Give the kid a break. The Quirk status of both teenagers is to remain confidential. Let the media speculate on both of them. If anyone asks, make it clear that all pros who were on the scene before I arrived are under investigation for their inaction in regards to the second hostage, and that I will be involved with it. It is of note that I only arrived on scene approximately 5 seconds before Midoriya charged the villain. Sansa nodded in agreement. All reasonable requests. I'll have to run it by my supervisors, but they'll probably clear it. Anything else? Nothing about the release. If the police would allow it, I would like them to somewhat obscure Midoriya and me as we leave. Just a line of officers standing in front of us as we cut through an alley. Done. Thank you for your hard work today, Hurricane, Sansa said, closing his notebook much less dramatically. Just doing my job, Officer Sansa. Have a good day, she replied, dipping her head. You too, Sansa replied, and then turned to give some officers their orders. Izuku had gone back to being numb. He was still shocked at the idea of a pro-hero walking him home, but it worked out in her favor, so he agreed. Anything for a hero. He was still trying to process why she was angry at the other heroes for being mad at him, but he could ask her that on the way home if he worked up the courage. Kazemi tapped Midoriya's shoulder once. She saw that the officers were in position. She pointed her thumb at them, and Midoriya nodded. The two walked step in step, green and silver. Midoriya, when I get the signal to drop the water screen, I plan to grab you by the hand and run. The press will be too distracted by the rest of the heroes and police to notice us immediately. Is that okay with you? Midoriya nodded. Kazemi's heart tugged at the way the light shifted on his face, highlighting his dried tears. Kazemi reached into one of her many pockets and pulled out a handkerchief. It may have been her day off, but she never left the house in anything but cargo pants. She handed it to him. He accepted it wordlessly and began wiping at his face. She got the signal just as her fingertips started itching, the tell she was reaching her quirk's limits. She waved her hands as if cutting off an orchestra, and the water screen evaporated. She grabbed Midoriya and they dashed through the alleyway. A certain blonde man watched the two of them as they vanished. He had witnessed everything they had done in the slime villain incident. He had already realized he was wrong, that what he said to the young boy earlier was wrong, but the sight of his old friend and confidant gave him pause. He had considered passing his secrets down to the young boy, as if that could make up for his mistakes, but now that would mean dealing with Kazemi. He held respect for the woman. He always would. He loved her as his sister, but they had barely spoken since Yagi Tashinori cut himself off. He knew that line of thinking would only bring him pain. He decided that if Kazemi thought the young boy was a suitable successor, she'd reach out. Either way, he was going to send her some nice lotion on her birthday. That water screen had to have aggravated her skin condition. He hoped lavender was still her favorite scent. Good luck, Kazi, he thought as he disappeared into the crowd. Unbeknownst to anyone, a storm was brewing. A literal storm too, but the metaphorical one is more important. A butterfly flaps its wings, you know the saying. All because Kazemi noticed a green-haired child with a reckless streak and a brain. Chapter 6. Beginning of Arc 2. Teachable Moments. Kazemi had to ask a few questions, but she got the kid to open up. He didn't say much about the attack, but once she asked him about his notebooks, he went off. He gave her a very detailed analysis of her own fighting style on request, but mentioned he had a written account in one of his older journals that probably went into more detail. Wait, did you say you have 13 of these notebooks? Midoriya nodded. My first few are in crayon and mostly All Might, but I still have them. Sentimental value, you know? Kazemi nodded. I still have my first pair of goggles. They were a gift from my dad when I got into UA. They're broken now, but otherwise, they're in mint condition. How'd they break? Training exercise in my second year. One of my classmates really didn't like me, but he never acted on it unless we were in mock combat. The rage from having them broken let me end the match within the next 10 seconds. I went and sobbed in the bathroom for the next hour though. That sucks. Honestly, I'm surprised they lasted that long. They weren't exactly cheap, but they weren't quite up to hero standards either. And he was socially ostracized by the rest of my class for the next week, so I guess it worked out in the end. But back to your notebooks. I'd like to take a peek at some of them, if you don't mind. Is there really nothing SP-? Kazemi held up her hand yet again. Kid, we'll deal with your self-esteem issues later. Your analysis is very advanced for someone of your age. I'd go as far as to say you have a better understanding of strategy than some pros. The kid started crying again. If this kid was my sidekick, I wouldn't have to carry water canisters around, Kazemi thought, half in jest. Why, you really mean it? Kazemi nodded, smiling brightly. I don't give out compliments I don't mean. Insults, sure. Sarcastic remarks, definitely, but never compliments. Midoriya smiled wider than ever before. Kazemi smiled back, before throwing her hand up to shield her eyes. Ack, too bright, she said, laughing. Midoriya stared at her for a moment before laughing along. They continued talking for a while longer. Kazemi was actively trying to be charming. Sure, but she found she didn't have to work that hard. This kid seemed to just like everyone instinctually, even if he didn't trust them. He made for excellent conversation too. However, Kazemi knew she'd have to bring up an uncomfortable subject soon. To Kazemi's surprise, Midoriya beat her to it. So, about my journals? He said. Kazemi raised her eyebrows. Midoriya read that as a sign to continue, as she intended. Well, you see there. Midoriya stopped walking. Kazemi stopped too. She turned around to face Midoriya. Izuku felt the same raw terror he felt when he was clinging to All Might's leg. It's not like her rejection would hurt much more than All Might's, he thought, almost scoffing. They're all labeled hero analysis for the future, he started. And, Hurricane said. She was being very patient with him, which made Izuku almost dare to hope that she would believe in him. I want to be a hero. I always have, even without a quirk. To his surprise, Hurricane simply nodded. Well, you have the brains for it. The instincts too, if today means anything. Of course you want to be one. Izuku couldn't stop his jaw from dropping. Aren't you going to tell me it's too dang dangerous without a quirk? His jaw practically fell off when she shook her head. He definitely started crying again. Sometimes we can't help what the heart wants. I'm not going to tell you it's impossible, but I'm not going to sugarcoat it either. It would be incredibly hard. Japanese society practically revolves around quirks these days. You'd have to work twice as hard, maybe thrice as hard. It wouldn't just be competing with the bad guys, but the good guys too. And yet, it could be done. You certainly seem to be smart enough for it. Hurricane looked him up and down as he fell to his knees. Young man, what on earth did All Might tell you? Izuku tried to speak through the sobs. He said dash. And then he couldn't speak. Hurricane knelt beside him, rubbing a circle on his shoulder. She held up another napkin. Izuku tried to reach for it, but his hand shook. Hurricane began wiping his tears for him. Okay, you're going to try and calm down. I'm going to guess what happened. Just nod your head yes and no. Okay? Izuku nodded. Did you see All Might's weaker form? Izuku nodded. He wasn't even surprised, of course Hurricane knew. She probably would have been the number 2 hero in Japan if they ranked her on the national leaderboard. Did he show you the scars? Izuku nodded again. Did you ask him if you could be a hero without a quirk? He nodded. Hurricane scowled. I think I know what his answer was. Midoriya, he was wrong, horribly, horribly wrong. I'm sorry that you had to hear that. It's been a while since he and I have talked, but I think we're overdue for a chat. Don't be mad at him, Izuku managed. Hurricane smiled at him, but it wasn't the genuine smile he had seen during their earlier conversation. Midoriya, even if he thought he was doing you a favor, he should have realized the weight his words carry. That maybe he shouldn't have made a snap decision about you. You can tell me the exact details later, but I'm going to be mad at him regardless. He should know better. Privately, she thought Shimura, Gran, and Madrid definitely taught him better than that. And what about Sir Night-Eye? God. Nori, you really know how to put your foot in your mouth. Besides, not every hero has a physical quirk. They have to rely on support items for combat, not their quirk. All Might really should have thought about them. Like Sir Night-Eye? Or Eraserhead? Why am I not surprised you know about Eraserhead? But yeah, like them. Their quirks do give them an advantage, but otherwise cannot be applied in combat. In fact, Sir often avoids using his quirk. Really? Hurricane's smile became genuine again. Really? Izuku sniffled. Thank you again for walking me home, Deku-san. My pleasure, kid. Now, I'm sure your guardians are worried about you, Kazemi said, standing up. She held out her hand for Midoriya. He took her hand, smiling yet again. She pulled him up, and they walked to his house in companionable silence, save for him mumbling directions. Chapter 7. Chapter Text. Kazemi smiled at the older Midoriya as she wept, doing her best to hide how awkward she felt. Really, it was no trouble, Midoriya-san. Today was supposed to be my day off, and I figured the kid might get something out of it. Kazemi was starting to wonder if these two had a secondary mutation for infinite tears, one that wasn't connected to a quirk factor. It would explain a lot. If they didn't feel the dehydration headache after a serious cry, then they wouldn't have any reason to get their emotions in check. Or maybe a secondary mutation that prevented dehydration. She'd bring up the possibility if she got into a more in-depth discussion on Quirk theory with the boy, which reminded her, Midoriya-kun, I would like to see your journals. Not the crayon ones, obviously, she smirked at the boy's blush. But pick out what you think is your best work. If you have anything on eraser, I'd be interested in that too. I'm honestly still just impressed you know about him. Midoriya nodded furiously. Right away, Hurricane-san. He made a mad dash for his room. Decker-san is fine, kid, she called after him. Kazemi chuckled to herself. He reminded her of a younger her, and maybe a little bit of a younger Nori. A bit of young Sir, too. Sir practically worshipped All Might's heir when they first met. He still held a reverence for the man, as did Kazemi. But now that both were privy to the older man's semi-endearing flaws, they knew better than to blindly follow him. Not Kazemi would ever blindly follow anyone still living anyone, but she definitely knew to question everything with all might. Kazemi let her smile drop as she pulled herself out of old memories and looked up at the mother in front of her. Midoriya-san, allow me to be blunt. While reckless, your son acted heroically today. If he could be trained out of his more reckless behavior, and perhaps instilled with some more self-confidence along the way, he would make a great hero. Kazemi elected to ignore the mother's proud tears. My purpose in asking him to show me his best work out of his journals was twofold. I am genuinely curious as to the extent of his analytical prowess, but I also wished to stall for time, so we could have a somewhat private conversation. I would like to train your son, and while the decision is ultimately up to him, I would like your blessing. Kazemi had noticed that the younger Midoriya was somewhat of a perfectionist, and that while he could work incredibly fast, she still figured it would take him some time to pick out what he deemed worthy of Hurricane. She was right. However, Izuku's real crisis was on whether or not to show her his analysis of her. He was also debating whether or not to show her some of his more subpar work so she could see the progress he's made over time, but the Hurricane analysis was the biggest concern. Why you think he can do it? The mother said. Kazemi nodded. She thought of the way his eyes shone when they were talking about quirks, how they could be applied creatively to help people or aid in combat. The reverence he still held for heroes, despite the fact that the number one hero had just demolished his dreams. I will tell you what I told him earlier. It would be incredibly hard, he'd face a lot of opposition, but I'd fight for him and hopefully someday with him. He's smart, quick-thinking, hard-working, and he has a good heart. Even if he ends up deciding against fieldwork, he could go far just by working behind the scenes. Since I could judge the content of his character in under an hour, I have no choice but to assume his potential for growth is astronomical. His sheer determination is evident in everything he does, and is impressive given the fact that his life is far from easy. He reminds me of a younger me, before someone believed in me. I would like to do for him what was done for me, to train him in body and in mind. Midoriya-san's stare grew wider. Kazemi took that as a sign to continue. I swear to you I will only push him as far as he can go, never past his limit. I will do what I can to keep him safe, but I want him to be strong enough to fight for himself. I want him to learn where his limits are so he knows when to call for help, but still hold his own whenever he can. It will be a long road, Midoriya-san, but I believe he can make the journey. Do I have your blessing? Midoriya-san smiled, almost as brightly as her son, but the tears streaming down her face told a different story. She was scared for her son, and yet so proud of him. Midoriya-san nodded. You have my blessing. Take care of him, please. Kazemi nodded. Even if he declines, I would like to keep an eye on him. With that in mind, Kazemi reached into the pocket on the bottom of her right leg. She pulled out a handful of individually wrapped tea bags. She always restocked on her favorite brands after a trip to the United States. Tea. The laughter of the mother before Kazemi was musical. Chapter 8. Chapter text. The Midoriyas insisted on making Kazemi tea, even though she brought her own tea bags and told them she was very picky about how her Irish breakfast tea was prepared, and they really didn't have to make her favorite tea, but it didn't stop them. If anything, it made them more determined to get the tea to her specifications. Kazemi suspected that, if they didn't have creamer in the fridge, one of them would have run to the store just to get some. As Kazemi waited for them to make her the tea as per her instructions, she read through Midoriya-kun's work. She was impressed with the amount of information he had on Eraserhead, and while she couldn't verify its accuracy, it seemed to line up with what she had heard of the elusive man. She really needed to get back into working with underground heroes in Japan. Kazemi was even more impressed by the sheer volume of questions he had written based on such limited information. Kazemi was also somewhat impressed by the way Midoriya-kun had organized his work before presenting it to her. He gave her a handwritten list of the best entries from each journal, and seemed to order them both chronologically and by quality, to show her both his improvement over time and his very best work. Kazemi found herself flipping through the entirety of Journal 8, the one with Eraserhead in it. That one, incidentally, contained an analysis on a hypothetical quirk. The description? Someone with hurricane's control over water, but instead of water it's lightning. She had to stop herself from laughing. If only he knew, she thought to herself. Then her eyes widened. Thankfully, the Midoriyas were distracted trying to steep her tea for exactly 5 minutes, so they didn't notice. Crap, I forgot about the nature of my quirk. I was so distracted by being mad at those pros and then mad at Toshinori and then how amazing this kid is, I completely forgot. Okay, calm down, Kazemi. It's not like you'll get too attached. You can still find someone else if you need to. God damn it, Toshinori. This is kind of your fault. If you hadn't hurt this kid, I wouldn't have had to clean up your mess again. In the distance, Yagi Toshinori felt a flash of panic. He glanced around, but no one was there. He shrugged it off as his nerves getting the best of him. Then lightning struck the building to his right, and he decided he'd best go home before he tempted fate again. Regardless, the ideas the younger Midoriya had for lightning were somewhat impressive. There were the usual non-combat applications like emergency power, light, and a defibrillator. Kazemi was impressed with the calculations that had been done to calculate exactly how the defibrillator thing would work. And the kid had some ideas for electricity manipulation. Kazemi had tried herself, back when she first started messing around with the electrical aspects of her power. He even had 2 ideas she hadn't considered. All in all, a good exercise in theoretical quirks. The kid even theorized that a pure electricity quirk might be able to manipulate storm clouds, given how often they build up static electricity. Kazemi resolved the next time she practiced with lightning, she'd try the cloud thing. The Midoriyas brought her the tea, exactly to her specifications. Kazemi was fairly certain the tea tasted better than it did when she made it because of the sheer genuineness of the two. She sipped her tea as Midoriya-san told her son about the offer. Midoriya-kun promptly burst into tears. Yet again. Kazemi resolved to buy more handkerchiefs as she tossed her last one to the boy. Yes. Thank you so much, Hurricane-sama. Kazemi shook her head, smiling. Deku-san, please, kid. If you call me Hurricane in public, we'll get swarmed. Deku-sensei. Kazemi sipped her tea. Close enough, she muttered. Just don't get too starstruck. I'm not gonna take it easy on you. I wouldn't want it any other way, Deku-sensei. Kazemi wondered just what she had gotten herself into. Chapter 9. Izuku was constantly surprised by how Deku-sensei seemed to genuinely like him. She believed in him and was constantly telling him how he could improve, and only occasionally made fun of him. She never made fun of his quirklessness. She only brought up his quirk status when she told him about the case of someone with a series of strange mutations, but because they didn't have a quirk factor, the person had to be registered quirkless. This was the start of a lengthy discussion on secondary quirks, aka abnormal mutations not necessarily connected to a quirk factor. She was only half joking when she suggested he might have had a mutation for infinite tears, which actually made him laugh. Only his mom ever told him jokes like that. The best part of his lessons was when they would talk about theoretical quirks. Quirks that didn't technically exist but could feasibly exist in this generation or future generations. So far, His favorite quirk they had come up with was one that allowed the user to teleport by activating every muscle in their body. It would keep them in shape and come in handy. Deku-sensei loved looking at quirks and dissecting every aspect of them, how they could affect the mundane aspects of life as well as heroics, as well as unconventional uses for the quirks. Izuku was just glad to finally have met someone who loved quirks as much as he did. Training with her these past 3 months had been hard, but fun. He actually had something to look forward to after school. The physical activity was good for him, and it would help to be a hero. Deku-sensei was constantly talking with his mom, figuring out what diet would be the best to help build muscle mass, making sure he didn't go overboard when he had to do workouts at home. And she was interested in his notebooks. She didn't find them creepy or weird. She told him that sometimes people were scared by things they didn't understand. She also told him to start a new notebook after she saw what happened to 13. She didn't ask him what happened, which was nice. School had actually gotten somewhat better for him since he started training under her. It was mostly because Kaken seemed bent on ignoring him, even though he still planned to go to UA. 7 months left until the exam after all. Kaken probably had to do prep work too. No time for the useless Deku. Hey, Deku kinda sounds like Decker. That's a better reason to have that nickname, right? But today, Deku-sensei seemed pensive. She couldn't have changed her mind about him, right? She made him a cup of tea, as she usually did before their more difficult quirk discussions. They drank in silence for a moment before she spoke up. Kid, I think it's time we discussed your quirk status in depth. Izuku held his breath. Obviously, you're almost always going to be at a disadvantage, regardless of what quirk type you're up against. It's unfortunate, but it's the truth. That's why we're going to level the playing field. Today, you're going to choose a weapon to train with. Izuku spit out his tea. Thankfully went straight back into the cup. A W weapon? Deku-sensei nodded. Most of the bad guys will have weapons anyways. That's why I learned how to make ice weapons earlier in my career. I don't need to rely on them now that I've perfected my water techniques, but I still keep in practice, just in case. I personally prefer swords and knives, but I'm decent with bow staffs and eskrima rods too. I can also handle myself with a sword and shield style. Like a Roman gladiator, Izuku muttered, reaching for his notebook. Wait, you can do ice? Deku-sensei nodded. Ice is just super cold water. At a molecular level, it's still water. The same applies to water vapor and steam. My quirk allows me to control water in all its states. If it was superheated to a plasma, I might still be able to control it. Provided the hydrogen and oxygen maintained their bond, of course. Which makes it unlikely, but you know, theorizing is half the fun. Kazemi decided not to mention her theoretical control over plasma was probably more a result of Elemental Storm's energy manipulation properties than the super hydrokinesis it gave her. Izuku nodded. That makes so much sense. Of course, if you're able to accurately manipulate the pressure the water is under, you could probably expand your awareness to non-liquid waters. Can you use your quirk on things mixed with water? Oh, can you change the temperature of things? Deku-sensei chuckled. Kid, way ahead of you on all that. The answers are yes and yes. Again, my high-pressure techniques are the most efficient, so that's what I rely on, but I still practice my other techniques so I don't get complacent. It's also a good idea for me to be versatile with my quirk in case a villain comes up with a way to counter my other strategies. That's so smart, Izuku said, writing it all down in the notebook he dedicated to Deku-sensei's lessons. It was a hurricane-themed spiral notebook his mom got him to celebrate the fact that he was about to start training under the woman. Deku-sensei laughed good-naturedly when he told her and ruffled his hair. She ruffled his hair a lot these days. The notebook was his first spiral notebook, and as such he was surprised by the section dividers built in, dividing the notebook neatly into eighths. Izuku had complained a little bit about the limitations that put on his organizational style, but it wasn't actually that bad. The notebook was really thick. However, Deku-sensei suggested cutting out the section dividers, which blew his mind. In the end, they kept the one that cut the notebook in half and the last one. The first half of the notebook became dedicated to their Quirk theory and analysis lessons. Everything between the two dividers was about his exercise regimen and how to formulate an exercise regimen for someone else. Everything after the last divider was for his observations about Deku-sensei. Write it all down, kid. Everything. Strengths, weaknesses, the color of my nose hair, whether I prefer pens or pencils, everything. There's more to combat than quirks, although they do play a major role. Psychology plays an important part too. Oftentimes, the determiner of a fight is who prepared for the fight better beforehand. You need to practice noticing more than just quirks if you want to stand a fair chance in a fight. He didn't actually write down the color of her nose hair, but he did notice it was a lighter silver than her hair, almost white. He had a hard time writing down her weaknesses at first, but as time went on he filled out half a page. When he told her about her struggles, she laughed. Maybe I should have given you a less experienced pro to dissect. Someone who hasn't corrected their flaws. I still have weak points, they're just no longer in my quirk. If you discount the skin condition it gives me, that is, she said, holding up her hand. The red spots on her palm and lines of peeled skin weren't obvious unless you knew what to look for, and no one ever would have guessed it was a quirk drawback. And so started the notebook of rookie pros. He and Deku-sensei would go through the news on Thursday afternoons, looking for new hero debuts. She would make him go through American and British news so he could practice his English, while she checked Canadian and French. I'll teach you French if you decide you want to do rescue work with me someday. For now, let me do the translating. They split Japanese news up evenly. Oftentimes he would hold himself just inches above the chair so he could exercise while he worked. Interestingly enough, Deku-sensei insisted they find the weak points of the pros who were at the slime villain incident first. You saw firsthand how they could have helped save you and the other boy. That makes them an easy starting point for you. More importantly, it gives you a better understanding of how they can improve on their weaknesses. That's another reason you should start looking for the weaknesses in quirks. That way you can help your allies counter their weaknesses and get stronger. Deku-sensei was nothing like the hurricane in the media, and yet she was exactly like her hero persona. She could be cold and calculating, able to pick apart her opponents in minutes, but also humble and well aware of her strengths and weaknesses. She was kind, but had the capacity for righteous fury. And now that she was asking him to train with a weapon, Izuku realized that for the first time in a long time, he trusted someone other than his mother. Can you show me how you do the temperature thing? Izuku asked, tearing his eyes away from the notebook. Deku-sensei nodded. I'm not going to show you it all just yet, since I'm going to need to use it for weapon creation later. But I can tell you I have better temperature control if I manipulate the water with my mouth. No idea why. The working theory is that it has something to do with how sensitive the skin is in there. Izuku nodded as Deku-sensei cupped her hands around her mouth, bent her head down, and made a weird puffing motion with her cheeks. Then she spit out a perfect sphere of ice. She made it float above her hand as Izuku peered at it. He quickly jotted down the approximate dimensions of the sphere and sketched out what Deku-sensei's face looked like as she made it. Hey, grab the thermometer from the kitchen real quick. I'm curious how cold this thing actually is. Izuku nodded, tossed his book onto the coffee table, and dashed to the kitchen. The safe house Deku-sensei insisted they meet at had an open floor plan for the most part. There were 2 bedrooms and a joint bathroom, and a basement where the security system mainframe was kept, but otherwise there were no walls. They also occasionally went to the beach, where Deku-sensei would blast him with water when he got trivia questions wrong while he exercised. He got blasted a lot. He was always giggling on the way home. Izuku rushed back with the scanning thermometer. It should be the same temperature as when it came out of my mouth. I've had a lot of practice maintaining constant temperatures. -2. Wow, Izuku said, writing it down. Deku-sensei shook her head. What are you forgetting? Izuku looked back up at her, and then to the thermometer. Oh, conversions. The thermometer is set to Fahrenheit. Deku-sensei nodded approvingly. Which makes the temperature negative. Izuku thought for a moment. 19 degrees Celsius? I would recommend plugging it into a conversion calculator like the one on your phone, but it sounds about right. Izuku did that, and it turns out he was about right. It was minus 18.8889. Wow, that's easily cold enough to give someone frostbite, he said, erasing the old temperature and writing in the new one. Yeah, it is. Hypothermia would set in first, but frostbite isn't that far behind. It's important to know the extremes of one's abilities. That way, you know how to reel yourself back and avoid unnecessarily damaging your opponent. On the flip side, if I ever need to use the ice as emergency support for a building, I know how cold it is and roughly how long it'll last without actively controlling the temperature. Your quirk is so powerful, Deku-sensei. It's powerful, true, but it's only as strong as my mind. That's the thing about quirks. One could have the best quirk in the world, but still be weak if you don't know how to use it to its full potential. Izuku nodded eagerly. He didn't tell Deku-sensei, but he wrote down her quotes all the time in the observation section of the lessons notebook. She just said a lot of smart things. And funny things too. He wrote that one down almost immediately. Do you think you can make it colder? He said. Probably, but I think it'll make my skin peel. Izuku nodded. I still think that's a weird quirk drawback. I think it's a secondary mutation, not connected to my quirk factor, but still affected by it. Like your tear ducts. Izuku laughed. You still need to choose a weapon. And that brings us to the next topic of discussion, Deku-sensei said. Do you want to be a public hero or an underground one? Izuku looked at her wide-eyed. There's equal appeal to both and equal drawbacks, Deku-sensei began. At least that's how it is from your perspective. I personally want you to go underground, but I'll do my best to prepare you if you really want to go public. Well, my dreams of reassuring innocent people can only come true if I go public, Izuku said. Sort of. You can reassure victims of petty crime after you save them. You'll probably never really hear about yourself on the news or hear interviews with your rescues, but you'll know that you saved them. For a lot of people, that's enough. Izuku nodded. The thing is, I still want to be like All Might. Or you. I want civilians to feel safe when I show up because they recognize me. I want them to see my smile and be reassured that everything will be okay. Kazemi was taken aback by that statement. No, not taken aback, taken back. Her head went back in time to when Toshinori met her. She was 10 and just happened to live in the same neighborhood as Pro Hero Madrid. That was how her mentor found her at 7 years old, fighting bullies with a stick. It was a very big stick. At 10, she was starry-eyed, looking at the 14-year-old before her. Then she realized what a big idiot he was. Seriously, how did he keep falling for Gran Torino's tricks? But even before they lost Shimura, he had big ambitions. He wanted to make the world better. He wanted to be a hero to everyone. After Shimura died, he carried on her legacy of the fearless smile. When Midoriya said that, all she saw was that 14-year-old blonde who had a dream. Still, she followed him to UA. She kept him in balance, made sure he didn't push himself too far. She made sure he remembered why they did what they did. The evil they had to be ready to face. And then Madrid, the first person to believe in her, the one who gave her elemental storm, was taken from them. Nana thinks that smiling is all it takes. I think it takes more than a smile. It takes strength and cunning. Building a reputation of fixing things before you smile will do anything. And even then, smiling like a maniac might make your rescues feel weird. It's up to you if you want to smile or not. But regardless, if you want your presence to make things better, you've got to have a reputation first. And oh boy, how did Kazemi build a reputation once he was gone? She destroyed the careers of every hero involved in Madrid's death. The ones she didn't psychologically break into retirement, she brought the hero commission down on. They all screwed up big time. They forgot basic rescue training, messed up basic first aid, and somehow let a villain get in close to an injured pro. No one noticed the bad guy until it was too late. Maybe they thought they could relax since Madrid, one of the best rescue heroes in the business, was there. But of course, the idiot got himself hit in the head rescuing another pro. one who should have known better than to stand in an unstable situation like that. After he died, she swore she'd never let incompetent heroes work in the field ever again. She'd become such a respected and well-known hero that her word alone could end a career. Midoriya had no idea, but he just reminded her of how she was before all that. How she only wanted to build things up to help the victims, to help people down on their luck. How Toshinori would ramble on and on about how there was nothing better than helping people. How Shimura smiled when she and Toshinori sparred well. How Madrid would muss Nori's hair. How Gran would laugh a little when she said something particularly funny or unexpected. The way Toshinori cried when he lost Shimura, and how tightly he held her when she lost Madrid. How Toshinori swore to save everyone to make up for when he couldn't save Shimura. Deku-sensei stared at Izuku, her eyes wide. She dropped her ice onto the floor. It shattered. She let her hand go limp. "Deku-sensei," he shouted. Deku-sensei shook her head. She levitated the ice off the floor and made it evaporate. "Sorry, kid. You just reminded me of someone I used to know. Someone very dear to me." She rubbed the bridge of her nose. "Kid, if you really want to go public, you're going to have to be smart about it. I want you to go underground so you don't have to deal with discrimination from the media. But if you want to go public, the way you'll be most successful is if you follow Sir Nitai's model. He does a lot of investigative work, letting people with more combat-oriented quirks do most of the heavy lifting. He still knows how to fight, of course, but he's very cautious." Izuku nodded solemnly. "Finish writing whatever you want and then meet me in the basement. It's time I show you the sparring room." Deku-sensei stood up rapidly. She picked up her mug, downed the tea in one gulp, and made for the stairs. Izuku watched her carefully. He flipped to the weakness sections of his observations. He started writing. Weakness number 8. Lost someone very important to her. Gets very sad and lost in thought when reminded of them. Loses focus when reminder is particularly strong. Countermeasure, unknown. Maybe avoidance of triggers? At the very least, try to cheer her up when sad. Weakness number 9. Can get very lost in thought. Quirk requires focus. It's obvious she's trained to counter that, but may still be able to be distracted. Unknown if only a symptom of weakness number 8. Countermeasure. Yelling at her seemed to refocus her attention. Further testing required to be certain. Izuku put away his pens and notebooks, then made for the stairs. Chapter 10. Summary. Izuku gets a goo. What? No? Okay then. Chapter text. Izuku stared at the wall of weapons, slack-jawed. "Wow," was all he could manage. Deku-sensei nodded. "Kid, it's a safe house. Sure, the security system has automated defenses, but it's better safe than sorry. If a bad guy really wants to get at someone, they'll try everything, and that includes EMPs." Izuku thought about the English abbreviation for a second before it clicked. Electromagnetic pulse? Yup. They stared thoughtfully at the wall of weapons for a little while longer. "Kid, I'm gonna ban you from long-range weapons for a little while. Since you don't have a quirk, people are only gonna pay attention to you if you excel in close combat. Also, guns are dangerous and I'm overprotective." Izuku nodded. "Valid. Other than that, feel free to experiment. Don't touch anything if you don't know what it is, but try the other weapons out on the test dummy in the corner. When you find something that feels right, let me know and we'll start working with it. In the meantime, I'm gonna get some ice weapons ready. Blunted swords are actually pretty hard to get right. Let me know if you have any questions." With that, Deku-sensei went over to the water cooler. Izuku turned back to the wall of weapons. Some of them were labeled. Izuku picked up a knife. It was part of a set and its exact make was labeled in English. He idly ran his hand along the flat of the blade. It was cold and smooth. He gripped the handle and swung it experimentally. Felt okay, but it was too loose. He picked up a sword. It was a katana. He held for a moment before deciding he would have the same problem he had with the knife. How about a bow staff? He thought. There were 5 in the armory, each a different length. He picked the one in the middle, which was taller than him by maybe 5 centimeters. Where should I grip it? He thought about asking Deku-sensei, as currently pulling a sword out of her mouth while she watched him, but decided against it. He would ask her if he couldn't figure it out himself. He thought about the martial arts movies he watched when he was really little. The guys in the movies would grip with one palm up, one palm down, and they'd have their hands an equal distance from the center. If I grip the staff so my hands divided into thirds, I should be good. As Izuku slid his hands along the staff, he heard Deku-sensei give a low whistle. And here I was going to go and tell you about a proper bow stance. You just found it on your own. Izuku smiled brightly. Really? Deku-sensei nodded. Damn, and I was hoping you'd pick a sword. Go ahead and try the staff, you seem to have the instincts for it. I need to get my rubber gloves. My only tip for the staff is to keep both hands on it at all times, especially when you're striking with it. The fancy one-handed stuff can come later. Deku-sensei went to the desk and opened a drawer. Izuku turned away and walked over to the dummy. It was bright orange and looked like it was made of foam. It was also only a torso. He decided to face it sideways and swing upwards. If I swing with my right side, the side with the upwards palm, I should get more force. The end of the staff hit the dummy in the face with a satisfying thwack. I thought it was made of foam? The dummy? Yes and no. It has a rubber core. Oh. Still, your form is pretty good for a beginner. Strike was sloppy, but the strength training you've had so far would have made that hit hurt if the dummy was a real person. The real question is, how'd it feel? Izuku thought for a moment. It felt right. I don't know how else to describe it. Deku-sensei grinned, looking feral. That is exactly what we're looking for. With your first weapon, that's a good sign. Deku-sensei put her gloves on, snapping them as she pulled them over her wrists. She picked up the ice sword from where it was sitting on the water cooler and started shoving it back into her mouth. Izuku stared wide-eyed as Deku-sensei made eye contact with him, looking mischievous. She stopped at the handle of the sword and began pulling it back out. Instead of a sword, she pulled out a bow staff. How dash. I made the ice evaporate inside my mouth and refroze it in the correct shape as I pulled the staff out, Deku-sensei said, spinning the staff experimentally. I'm a little rusty with the bow staff, so I'm going to show you the basics while I warm up. We're going to be drilling a lot before we actually spar. Watch me carefully, okay? Yes, sensei, Izuku yelled. Deku-sensei looked at him with something in her eyes he couldn't quite place. It was only after he successfully copied her hand spin for the first time that he figured it out. It was pride. Deku-sensei was proud of him. Chapter 11. To Kazemi's delight, Izuku took to the bow staff like a duck to water. He nailed the basics in less than a week. Okay, I'm not going to let you take a weapon home just yet, but you should still practice some of the basics as a part of your at-home workout routine. Ask your mom if you can take apart an old broom or something. After his Midoriya, you're calling him Midoriya, Kazemi chided herself. But after he ran through every drill perfectly 2 days in a row, Kazemi decided to teach him some new strikes. More specifically, she decided to spar with him. She held back, of course, but she still won a lot. If she didn't hold back, he'd probably go home with a lot worse than some bruises. Sorry about the face bruise, kid. It's been a while since I've had to hold back this much against an opponent. Couple that with a weapon I'm not the master of, and you get bruises. It's okay, Deku-sensei. Mom knows it's from you, not anyone else. Kazemi was starting to get suspicious about how well Midoriya could take a hit. He shrugs off some of those blows like they're nothing, and it's not because he's dodging them. A lot of those I'm hitting at the full force I intended. That's the response of someone who can take a hit because they're used to getting hit harder. That kind of pain tolerance is unnatural for a middle schooler. Kazemi would literally eat her ice sword if Midoriya-san was hitting her child, instead of doing the evaporation trick. She loved him too much, and he loved her just as fiercely. Maybe Midoriya-san was guilty of being overprotective and a bit of a helicopter parent, but not physical abuse. Kazemi asked some questions about the kid's father, but apparently he was working overseas in America. Midoriya-kun video called him every holiday and sometimes visited over summer break, which explained why the kid got trivia questions about America wrong the least. The only logical conclusion is school. That made a sickening amount of sense. The kid's jumpiness whenever she brought up his quirk status. How when she first started training him he seemed afraid that she might change her mind. How he shied away from showing her his journals at first. He admitted his classmates thought they were creepy, so he was used to hiding them, but Kazemi suspected it was more than that. That blonde kid with the explosive quirk. The second hostage, he could have easily destroyed Journal 13. Not to mention he seemed to know Izuku Midoriya-kun, damn it. You're not that attached. But the blonde knew him before that incident. That much is obvious. Unfortunately, Kazemi could only dismantle one group of bigots at a time. Elder Middle School would have to wait. She was still dealing with the fallout of the sludge villain incident. Since everything turned out okay in the end, the Hero Commission wanted to let the heroes from that day off with a warning. Kazemi was currently bullying them into suspended licenses, mandatory community service, and retaking the licensing exam. Not everyone was going to get the same punishment because not everyone was equally incompetent that day, but they would all feel her wrath. Kazemi was glad Izuku was progressing so rapidly in physical training. She didn't have to worry about the kid's abandonment issues so much if he could drill and practice on his own. Which was why when she couldn't get the Hero Commission to schedule the meeting at a better time, she only felt a little guilty when she texted the kid. Hey kid, a meeting came up. I'm not going to be able to make training today. Run through the bow staff routine on your own with your broomstick. You can do some weightlifting too, but keep it light since I won't be spotting you. If you're really feeling antsy, look up some bow staff tricks. Some of them might aid your mobility. You could also run laps around the block. We're going to add runs to your schedule soon anyways. Okay, thanks for letting me know. I'm going to do some quirk analysis too. No problem, kid. Stay safe. Kazemi slid her phone into her pocket. Honestly, sometimes she was just glad he had talked the kid out of hero chasing. When she pointed out that he would get better at analysis if he learned how to make accurate deductions with limited information, he agreed it would be better if he stopped. Midoriya seemed to have ungodly bad luck, and while he was becoming less reckless under her guidance, she still worried about him. Sometimes, it was all she could do to tire him out enough that he'd go straight home. Backdraft watched Hurricane out of the corner of his eye. She just put her phone away and was glowering at the room. This was the last meeting he'd have with her over the slime villain incident, and hopefully the last ever. She was wearing her summer combat uniform, her eyes hidden under goggles and a helmet. She'd probably just come off patrol before this meeting. She'd have to swap to her winter uniforms within the next month. Backdraft thought. Maybe she wouldn't be so intimidating if she was in her fluffier costume. Thank you all for coming. The Hero Commission representative began. Backdraft forgot his name. This is our last meeting, and I would like to once again apologize that these disciplinary hearings took so long. We didn't want to interfere with Hurricane's travel schedule. Backdraft winced as he watched the human storm snap. That's why we stretched this out? I thought you guys were just reluctant because no one was actually hurt. The representative winced. Well, yes, but no one really expected such a prominent international hero to stay in Mustafu as long as you have. We expected you to travel in and out as the schedule required. Hurricane growled. I would have slept in this goddamn chair if it meant we could have dealt with this in less than a month. The rep cleared his throat. Well, what's done is done. Now dash. I don't think you quite understand the serious problems that have arisen from this delay, not to mention the gross lack of communication on your department side of things. I'll be reporting this to your superiors. The rep paled, before offering a shaky smile. I understand your frustrations, Hurricane. This was not entirely my decision, so please save your anger for the villains. Backdraft could have sworn that Hurricane rolled her eyes. She crossed her arms. Very well then. Will you announce it or should I? She said. I'll begin. Slugger, Death Arms, and Kamui have been determined to be the worst offenders. All of you could have easily attempted to pull the hostage from the slime. Besides, while your criticisms of the other boy's recklessness were valid, you neglected to consider that he was most likely traumatized as well and in need of basic counseling. I believe you mean basic human decency, Hurricane interjected. The rep forced a smile. In addition, that boy should not have been able to get past so many capable pros. Backdraft was otherwise occupied, and Mount Lady was on the opposite side of the situation. But the rest of you have no excuse. But we would have put ourselves in danger had we attempted to rescue the hostage. He was using his quirk wildly and Slugger was got off by a large amount of ice suddenly appearing on his face. He screamed somewhat, but it was muffled. Backdraft looked at Hurricane, who had barely moved her hand. She can do ice? Heroics wasn't always a profession. Heroes used to be anyone who risked their life for the sake of others, consequences be damned. While it's true that we have to exercise a certain degree of restraint and caution, our job is to save innocent lives. Do you not yet understand that we are required to risk personal injury? You could have gotten hurt had you acted, but that child would have died had no one interfered in time. A miserable, lonely, excruciating death at that, a death surrounded by people too afraid of hurting themselves to try and save him. No one deserves to die like that, no one, let alone a child. Your self-centered line of thinking would have inevitably led to a death like that. If not that hostage's, then someone else's. Hurricane took a deep breath. While it is true that there are selfish aspects to this industry, it is your job to be unselfish while working. It is your job to risk everything in the protection of innocent life. You are a civil servant. Act like it. Hurricane waved her hand, and the ice around Slugger's mouth melted. Hurricane levitated the water towards her and into her back canister. The representative cleared his throat again. While I disagree with some of her sentiments, Hurricane was correct. We pay you to risk personal injury to save our citizens, as well as your life to some extent. We've worked out suitable punishments based on your level of experience in this industry and your actions during the incident. The rep turned to Mount Lady. Given that the incident occurred the day of your debut, we'll treat it as the mistakes of a rookie. You'll be undergoing remedial training, but you are permitted to continue going hero work at the same time. The rep turned to Kamui Woods. You are in a similar situation, Kamui. Given that you started a few months ago, you will be on probation while attending remedial training. You will come off probation if your teacher notes remarkable improvement. Otherwise, your license will be completely restored when you complete the course. You are permitted to act in emergency situations, but you must operate under the discretion of another hero. The rep looked at Slugger and Death Arms. You two will have the same punishment, but you will not come off probation until you complete the course. Neither of you are to assist in emergencies unless your lives are in danger. If you violate the terms, your licenses will be revoked permanently. Slugger, in light of your remarks today, you'll be taking the longest course and will have to retake the licensing exam. Initially, Death Arms and you would have shared a course, but he is taking the situation with more dignity. Hurricane smiled. Backdraft started to shake under his uniform. He was the last one left. Slugger, Death Arms, hand over your licenses, the rep said simply. Death Arms slid his across the table. Slugger passed his to Kamui, who then passed it to the rep. The rep handed it to Hurricane, who lifted her goggles. She leaned over the table and made eye contact with Slugger. Then, she took a bite out of his license and began chewing, without breaking eye contact. She swallowed hard. Slugger started visibly shaking, and the man had already paled. It was at that moment Backdraft realized Hurricane bit into Slugger's picture. Your license has been voided, she said, a shred of paper in between her front teeth. The rep almost rolled his eyes. And that leaves Backdraft. Hurricane, if you would. With pleasure. Hurricane turned directly to him. Backdraft, as a rescue and fire specialist, you prioritized your specialty. We understand why you felt the need to do that, but you should have attempted to rescue the hostage. You would have been the most resistant to the fires he caused, and could have possibly used your water to blast away the slime. We are taking into account that you have spent most of your career operating in a supportive role, and the fact that you are not currently signed with a hero agency. Backdraft managed to stop shaking, but he was still scared. What does this mean? What does she mean? We have determined that your constant work with the fire department is holding you back. You lack the skill set necessary to deal with villain situations on your own. We have decided that the remedial courses the others are taking would not benefit you or any civilians you encounter in the future. With that in mind, you are to sign on with my hero agency and undergo some of our basic training before resuming your normal hero work. Backdraft felt his jaw drop. He heard Mount Lady gasp. There will be other changes, of course. For starters, when deploying with my rescue agency, you will be required to wear a version of your hero costume that has the team logo. The color is up to you, but I think dark gray would look best. Ideally, you will be allowed to go back to working with the local fire department as you have been, but if and when that happens is my decision. You would also be expected to be available for my rescue team should we need you. I will be monitoring your progress closely. If I feel you're not taking it seriously, the Hero Commission will revoke your license. Backdraft was speechless. Luckily, the rep interjected. Of course, we can't make you sign on with her agency. The option of attending remedial classes is available, but it is worth noting that working with Hurricane would look better on paper. Should you attend remedial classes, we would have to suspend your license under the same stipulation as Kamui. Hurricane was interested in you purely because your motivation in delaying the hostage rescue was different from the others involved in the incident. So, Backdraft, what's your decision? Hurricane said. Backdraft swallowed hard. On the one hand, the remedial classes and suspension could hurt his career. On the other hand, Hurricane. You should go with Hurricane, Backdraft, Mount Lady said quietly. I agree, Kamui added, also subdued. She may be harsh, but she's incredibly skilled in both rescue and combat. That doesn't happen by accident. She knows what she's doing. Kamui knew the true extent of his fear, but he had a point. Not to mention the license suspension. Death Arms joined in. I don't envy you, but you really should go with her. Backdraft looked down at the table. I'll sign on with Silverstorm. I accept any restrictions the agency may put on me. Internally, Kazemi sighed with relief. Honestly, Slugger was the only one she harbored any vindictive agenda against at this point. Right, her concern was making sure that none of these heroes had to hold themselves responsible for the death of an innocent person. She wasn't sure Slugger would get better, but the others seemed to be on the path to growing from this. Backdraft was her primary concern. She had deduced the man wasn't that confident in himself outside of his ability to rescue civilians from fires, and that bothered her. His lack of self-confidence most likely would lead him to take the course seriously, but there wasn't much they could teach him that would help in the long run. She wouldn't be able to help the man like she did Izuku, but it wasn't too late for him either. Crap, I keep calling him Izuku. I'm gonna have to tell him about Elemental Storm, aren't I? The meeting ended shortly after that. All that was left was the paperwork. Everyone cleared out relatively quickly, some offering sympathetic glances to Backdraft. Eventually, it was just the two water users left. Hurricane stood suddenly and approached him. I'm done with patrol for the day. Do you want to come by the agency branch and start getting things sorted out? Backdraft blinked, before remembering Hurricane couldn't see it under his mask. I don't see why not. Hurricane frowned. Backdraft, I've noticed you're scared of me. Well, more than people usually are. Why is that? Backdraft felt his stomach drop again. It's nothing, honestly, Dash. It's clearly something. Neither of them spoke. Hurricane pursed her lips. Look, I won't work with you in the field if that's what you want. I'll go over everything and keep a close eye on your progress, but there are other senior heroes at Silverstorm. People I trust. Backdraft said nothing. He was too scared. How pathetic, he thought. Backdraft, despite what you may think, I want you to succeed in this. That's why we're here. I may be sadistic at times, but I want to help you be the best hero you can be. If I didn't think you could cut it, I would have had them take your license. Backdraft sighed. He might as well rip the bandage off now. Hurry dash. Call me Decker. Backdraft cleared his throat and steeled his nerves. Decker-san, you're one of the strongest hydrokinetics I know, maybe even one of the strongest ever. She tilted her head at him, a silent cue for him to continue. When we first met, you pulled at my water. You still do sometimes. Hurricane nodded. I see. I'll try to refrain dash. You don't understand. Backdraft stood up suddenly, putting his hands on her shoulders. Her mismatched eyes flashed with an emotion he couldn't place, but he didn't care. He had to get off his chest. My hands are made of water, Hurricane. You messed with my hands. Hurricane's eyes widened in realization, and as she put her hand over her mouth, he wanted to rewind time. Oh my God, she whispered. Why haven't you gone to the rap? You weren't signed with an agency. Backdraft took a moment to translate the English in his head. What's that got to do with anything? Most agencies have therapists available for their heroes. Mine has them around the clock, as I like to stick close with Canadian law. Oh. Yeah, oh. Hurricane looked at the floor sadly. Backdraft ever expected to see the famed Hurricane so downtrodden. I hurt you, she started. I hurt you and had no idea. I'm so sorry. Backdraft could have sworn she sounded like she was trying not to cry. He took his helmet and mask off for the first time that day. The fact that his eyes were translucent often scared people, but he didn't want to suffocate inside the uniform anymore. Not for this conversation. And okay, if it unnerved Hurricane a little, he felt he deserved a little payback. Kazemi was not unnerved by his eyes. She was in fact a little fascinated by them and the way there seemed to be a colored patch of water that served as his pupils. She had to stop her brain from overanalyzing his mutations, or the way he was able to stretch his hands out of the water hose spigots of his costume. She did immediately make a note of everything, from the fact that his fingertips seemed to be normal, and that he had what looked like blood vessels and nerves inside the water part of his hands. Kazemi had to work incredibly hard to shut up her analytical brain, but she did it relatively quickly. It's not something I like to publicize, and my hands aren't completely made of water. Just mostly. I never touched your eyes, did I? I mean, most people's eyes have water, but if I did dash. You didn't. I'm sorry I never told you. And it didn't hurt exactly. It's just terrifying to lose control of your limbs? If I had known. I honestly just thought I was tugging on water you already generated. Oh shit. No wonder you were so freaked out at the slime incident. I used your water then too. Backdraft laughed a little. He felt like he was going insane. Seriously, it may not have actually hurt, but you were traumatized, Backdraft. I can't even imagine how horrific that was. You're going to start seeing a therapist at least once a week. As your new boss, I'm going to have to make that an order which was in the contract you signed. I can order you to go to therapy. That's probably for the best. One of our trauma counselors should be available right now. Backdraft thought about that for a minute. Is that an offer, Decker-san? If you want it to be, she said, shrugging. I think I do, he whispered. Hurricane picked his helmet off the table. Let's go, then. She reached into the water hose spigot and grabbed his hand. She gripped it firmly and tugged him after her. A part of her brain immediately went into a tangent on surface tension passive quirk aspects. Another part began debating whether or not his messy bluish-black hair was a mutation related to his quirk. She noted that Izuku would love to analyze Backdraft's mutations. For the first time in a long time, Backdraft wasn't completely and irrationally terrified of the woman. He decided to call that a win. Chapter 12. Kazemi was nervous. Logically, she knew she shouldn't be. Izuku would believe her. She picked the right day so as not to interfere with their training schedule. It was a Thursday, so she could pose the idea of transferable quirks and play it off as purely theoretical if he didn't take it well. Izuku was a good kid, one of the smartest and most emphatic people she'd ever known, and held affection for her. Maybe it was the sleep deprivation getting to her. She had a couple of late patrols the past week, and unfortunately she hadn't been able to sleep as much during the day as she usually would have. The disciplinary hearings and getting backdrafts set up at her agency had been huge time eaters. Important ones, but time eaters nevertheless. There were 4 months into Izuku's training, 4 months out of 10. If she couldn't trust him with this now? Normally, Kazemi would have just napped her nerves away, but she couldn't do that. She had to be awake when Midoriya got there. So she made tea. She picked out her favorite mug, the white one covered in rainbow cat paws. She also used Izuku's favorite mug, an All Might mug so old the red was pink, and the yellow matched the shade of a coffee drinker's teeth. It was his childhood mug, which he brought to a lesson after Kazemi suggested bringing something from home to make him more comfortable. It hadn't left since. Izuku opened the door. Kazemi was silent as she stirred her tea with a spoon. Izuku changed his shoes and took his mug off the coffee table and went into the kitchen to make his own tea. Kazemi made lavender bergamot tea for herself and had already put some ice cubes in to cool the tea. It was her usual strategy, make the tea a little strong so that when the ice melted and watered it down the taste would be just right. This was especially useful when making bergamot teas since they could easily turn bitter. Izuku sat down on the sofa across from Kazemi, dunking the tea bag a few times to help it steep. Kazemi noted he chose a mint tea. It matches his hair, she thought. Neither of them spoke a word until Izuku took his tea bag out and threw it in the trash bag. Kazemi found she couldn't say what she had planned. She couldn't bring herself to talk around the truth. She knew she could have done it with anyone else, that she had done it a million times, but some part of her was screaming at her to tell him the truth. "Is something wrong, Deku-sensei?" Izuku said. Kazemi sighed. "Kid, you can call me Kazemi if you want. I've grown far more attached to you than I ever expected." Izuku sputtered at her words. She went on, staring at her melting ice cube. "I suppose I should have seen it coming. I've lived a somewhat lonely life, and you are exceptional. I couldn't have asked for a better student. I will always be proud of you no matter what. I want you to know that." "Decker, what's wrong? Are you sick?" Kazemi laughed once, sounding bitter. "Not as far as I know. Not really." She rubbed the back of her neck. "I initially planned to tell you this after today's lesson, depending on how you reacted to the subject matter. But I can't go through with it. I'm not sure why." Izuku leaned across the table. "Tell me, please." Kazemi exhaled, long and hard. She took a sip of her tea. It was warm but not hot. It might have needed some honey. She leaned back into the sofa, kneading the cushion with her left hand and staring at the ceiling. "It starts with a story that dates back to the dawn of quirks. Long ago, when powers first appeared, there were 2 brothers and a cousin. One of the brothers had a very unusual quirk, the ability to take others' powers for himself. He could also give those powers to others." Izuku gasped. Kazemi went on. "Eventually, he began to amass a following. Some people followed him because he took away their unwieldy powers, others because he gave them those powers. One thing the 2 types agreed on was to follow their leader blindly. That man became known as All for One." Kazemi rolled her neck and then took another sip of tea. "What happened to him?" Izuku asked. "I'll get to that." That said, at the time, All for One practically ruled over Japan with his criminal empire. No one talks about it because the government did a good job scrubbing the records, but it's the truth. As far as anyone knew, his brother and cousin were quirkless. The other brother, the one we now call the first, he was sickly and had a strong set of morals. The cousin just wanted the family to get along, but eventually was forced to side with the first. Before that happened, though, people began attempting to kill the first as a way to get it all for one. So All for One found someone with a powerful quirk they didn't want. Mind you, at this time the quirked were often treated like we treat the quirkless today. Ironic. Humans always shy away from what is different. What did All for One do? He gave that powerful quirk to the cousin, with the mandate that he became the first bodyguard. That quirk is what we now call Elemental Storm. The quirk allows the user to control the elements fire, ice, water, electricity, earth, air, plants, the works. Hell, one of the guys managed to generate sound waves. It was a part of his original quirk, I think. Don't tell me that Elemental Storm got passed around? Well, yeah. No one figured it out until he died. But the cousin was born with a quirk. He was born with the ability to pass on any powers he had to someone once he died. The quirk has been passed around many times throughout the years, growing more and more powerful. I was chosen as the next successor when I was 12, and I fully inherited the quirk when I was 19. Kazemi finally looked at Izuku. He was pale, staring straight ahead at Kazemi's mug. I'm telling you this because of the way the quirk chooses who it's passed on to. There is a way to force it to be passed onto a specific person, but it's complicated and gross. The default method is based on who the user subconsciously thinks would be the best fit for the quirk. Kazemi felt the tears start streaming. Like I said, I didn't expect I would care for you as much as I do, and yet here we are. I had to tell you because as things are, if I were to die, you would receive the quirk. Izuku clenched his pants leg, tears silently falling from his eyes. I cannot apologize enough for this. I want nothing more for you to follow your dreams. I want nothing more than for you to be a trailblazer for everyone who's been told they were too weak to be a hero. I'm sorry, Izuku. I wish things were different. Izuku let out a sob. It's funny. That's what Mom said after we found out. When I asked her if I could still be a hero, she wished things were different, too. Oh, Kazemi said. That changed everything, and yet nothing at all. Kazemi crossed over to the Izuku's side of the coffee table, so she could hold him as they cried together. Meanwhile, on the other side of Mustafu, Aizawa Shoyuta was finishing the last of his paperwork for the day. He was filing for the expulsion of a bully in UA's general education course. Hisashi, Shoyuta noted, was humming while he typed a report up. He was currently trying to get a second-year hero course student into therapy. Shoyuta hadn't gotten a lot of details, but based on Hisashi's behavior, it was bad. He wouldn't have been humming one of his comfort songs otherwise. It was a shock to the both of them when their boss, Principal Nedzu, popped up from under the communal desks. He usually came from the ceiling. Hisashi jumped. Shoyuta merely inhaled a second earlier than he would have. Good afternoon, you two. Nedzu, Shoyuta said, nodding his head. Yamada, Aizawa, I have a very special task for the two of you before today's staff meeting. Shoyuta raised his eyebrows. This particular meeting had been on the schedule for a month, including the fact that all staff involved with the hero course were to stay after everyone else. It was surprising that Nedzu would spring additional duties on them the day of. What's up? Hisashi said, or as he thought of himself, Present Mike. Whenever he was in costume, even when he was teaching, he couldn't help but think of Present Mike as a different person than Yamada Hisashi. It made it easier for him to play into his gimmick. I need the two of you to fetch Hurricane and bring her back for the meeting as well, Nedzu said, clapping his paws together. Mike felt his jaw drop and his sunglasses fell down his nose. He was fairly certain he paled. Hurricane? The hero eater, Mike said. Shoyuta rolled his eyes at Hisashi's overreaction, but he was unnerved too. Hurricane had an amazing track record as a hero and a reputation as a harsh but kind person. She'd have to have that personality, Shoyuta supposed, to be as excellent as she was at both Riku's work and combat. Yet she also had a reputation for destroying the careers of various heroes, some of them young and full of promise, and others that had been in the business for even longer than her. Some of them, rumor had it, she had psychologically scarred so badly they retired on their own. Others she had legal cases brought against by the Hero Commission or harassed by the media. The list of destroyed heroes was longer than Hazishi was tall. Hair included and quite possibly in 9-point font size. That's the one, Nedzu chirped. She'll be vital to today's discussion, and I value her opinion greatly. Why do two of us have to go? Shoyuta questioned. Nedzu made his eyes blank but made his smile wider. Both Shoyuta and Mike knew that face meant that Nedzu had a reason for whatever he was doing, but he didn't want to tell you. Well, she would appreciate the company, for one. Present Mike swallowed hard. Shoyuta pinched the bridge of his nose. Both were currently contemplating their entire life and wondering what they did to make their boss throw them under the bus like this. I'm about done here. Hizashi? Mike nodded. He pressed enter on his keyboard and stood up. Excellent. I've already sent the address to both of your phones. You'll be arriving at one of her agency safe houses, but the defenses should be disarmed. Their phones dinged simultaneously. Neither of them checked the message. Why would the defenses be disarmed? Mike asked. She's meeting with someone rather important to her. Over a very serious matter, if I'm not mistaken. That's not cryptic at all, Mike thought. And that was how the two pros found themselves in a car, on their way to meet someone who might destroy their entire life's work for the fun of it. Of course, logically, both of them knew that she wouldn't actually do that. But she had a reputation for a reason. If they gave her a good enough reason, she'd break them over her knee like twigs. That was Hizashi's metaphor. Neither had ever met Hurricane before, of course. If they did, they would know she wasn't like that. She may have taken a vindictive pleasure in what she did to some heroes, but her good enough reasons were reckless endangerment of civilians and her allies, not being a douche. Although the two categories often overlap, they would have heard her talk about Madrid and put two and two together. But since none of that had happened, present Mike was stress humming the entire way there. As the two drove on, Kazemi and Izuku wrapped up their first cry session. Kazemi went back to the sofa she was on earlier and flopped on it dramatically. How do you guarantee who the quirk gets transferred to? Izuku asked. Kazemi shook her head. I'll tell if you decide you want to be the successor. I wasn't kidding when I said it was gross. The important part is that it allows the chosen successor to inherit parts of the quirk early. Izuku perked up at this. Really? If you did the ritual, you would get every power the quirk has stored, save for the ability to pass the quirk on and my original quirk. That's another reason I had to tell you. It would be easier for you to become a hero if, Kazemi shook her head. And I know that being a hero has always been your goal, above all else. Izuku took a drink. This is a lot OT process, Kazemi-sensei. You're handling it better than I did. Granted, I was younger than you when I found out. And what about All for One? What happened to him? Kazemi made a face. I have reason to believe he was finally killed about 5 years ago, but the person who did it, they nearly died. All for One's body was never recovered. By the way, Elemental Storm is not the only quirk that can be passed on. I can't tell you much about the other one, but you should know that it was the first's quirk. He had a quirk too? Kazemi nodded. We call it One for All. It's always been the job of the wielders of Elemental Storm to protect the current wielder of One for All until they master the quirk. I had a falling out with the current wielder. I'll mend fences with them when they choose their successor. A mutual friend of ours has a recommendation already. Izuku nodded. Does that friend have one for you? I don't know. I've avoided the subject with him. Probably. He's always been the type to overplan. Izuku started to cry again. Kazemi tossed him a handkerchief. Kazemi-sensei, I will always be grateful to you for taking me on like this, for believing in me, but I'm going to need time to think this through. I get it, kid, she said, her voice suddenly soft. If you decide against it, I'll do my best to find someone else, but you should know I'll always think of you as my greatest student, as the closest thing I'll have to a kid of my own. She was crying again too. Izuku nodded. It was then he knew she deserved to know exactly what he was up against, what he was trying to change, what no other kid deserved to go through. Kazemi, the day you met me was a lot worse than you saw. I'm bullied. Kazemi turned her head to look at him, not looking the least bit surprised. Izuku found he couldn't stop himself from talking now that he started. I guess it was obvious, but that day was the worst it's ever been. The teacher asked us about careers, and he told everyone I wanted to apply to UA. They made fun of me, of course. My childhood friend, Kaken, has always been amazing. He has an excellent shot of getting into UA, but he always takes the lead on the bullying, especially against me. That day, he stayed behind after school too. Izuku took a deep breath as a fresh wave of tears came onto him. He told me to kill myself. Kazemi's eyes widened in horror. And pray for a quirk in my next life. He threw number 13 out the window after using his quirk to burn it. It ended up in the koi pond. I went to walk home after I fished it out. That was when I was attacked by the slime villain. I felt like I was dying. I nearly did. All Might saved me, which you already knew. But he caught the guy. I lied about that to make him look better. The truth is I clung to his leg as he jumped away. I distracted him mid-air. That's how the slime villain got away. The bottle fell out of his pocket. He landed on a roof and I went to ask him if he thought I could be a hero without a quirk. You know how that went. Holy shit, Kazemi muttered. I knew quirkless discrimination was bad, it always has been, but I thought I should have known. Izuku. I'm sorry. Izuku shook his head. You don't have to apologize. It's not your fault. And you're different, which is nice. Anyways, he ran out of time during my question. He explained what happened to him and then he gave me his answer. He left and I saw the first explosion from the hostage situation from the roof. I kind of just wandered there subconsciously. When I saw that someone else was drowning like I couldn't just stand there and I had to do something. Kazmi nodded. I know the story from there. Kid, I'm going to have you talk to a counselor about this. I'm not going to make you go constantly, but at least one session would do you good. Izuku considered that. Can it wait until I get into UA? If I go to therapy now, they might make fun of me for that too. Kazemi exhaled oddly at that. I don't like it, but I'll allow it. In addition, can I sue your school system? It kind of sounds like they've enabled a bunch of shitty behavior. Izuku shook his head furiously. Absolutely not. Kazemi shrugged. Worth a shot. Do you want to know the absolute worst part of it all? Izuku said, laughing a little. Hit me, Kazemi replied. Kaken was the slime villain's second victim. Kazemi facepalmed. Why am I not surprised? Oh God. Now I remember you calling him Kaken. He seemed like such a jerk that day, but I just chalked it up to being traumatized from nearly dying, which he was, but still. Please don't stop him from becoming a hero, Kazemi-sensei. He deserves a chance too. If UA is anything like it was when you went there, he'd get a chance at being a better person. Kazemi made a sour face. On the one hand, I'm proud that you know me well enough to know that you needed to ask me not to destroy him. On the other hand, I really want to. Kazemi, Izuku sighed, laughing despite himself. Look, I think he deserves every horrible thing I can throw at him, but since you want him to attempt to become a hero in purely the professional sense, I'll let him. But the second that changes, you tell me and I will ruin his life so fast I'll have to add super speed to my quirk registry. They both started laughing now. Both felt better now that they had cleared the air, although Kazemi was internally reeling from her horrific discovery about Izuku's school life. She was half certain she would verbally eviscerate Toshinori the next time she saw him or tell him that he could have caused a suicide. If she didn't know about Toshinori's horrific sense of self-worth, she'd do both, and be more inclined to do even one. They talked a bit more after that as their tears dried. Kazemi mentioned Backdraft's mutations. They decided that after he got settled into his new role at her agency that she would invite him to one of their Thursday lessons. They debated the skill of a new hero with the power to make people spontaneously burst into dance. They went through several cups of tea before the doorbell rang. Kazemi immediately stood up. She summoned a stream of water and floated it to about head level. The perfect position to strike someone with a high-pressure blast and knock them out. She made a shushing motion at Izuku as she crept towards the door. She looked through the peephole and promptly decided that she shouldn't have gotten out of bed that morning. Okay, why are Present Mike and some hobo pro outside my door? They had to have come from UA. School hasn't been out of session long enough for any other thing. That means Hobo is probably a UA staff member too, and an underground hero since I have no clue who he is. Kazemi dismissed her water stream, held back a yawn and opened the door. She had a sinking feeling Nedzu had something to do with this, and Nedzu sending her a message in person was never a good sign. The two heroes seemed surprised by her appearance. The scruffy pro spoke up first. Are you Hurricane? Yes, also known as Deku Kazemi. The two exchanged glances as Kazemi yawned. She might as well get some answers. Chapter 13. Kazemi rubbed at her eyes. She was too tired for this. Care to explain what two UA pros are doing knocking at my door while I'm in the middle of a private lesson? How'd you even find this address? It's a safe house. Not dash. Kazemi cut herself off. Nedzu. Never mind. Come in. She heard Izuku squealing under his breath as Present Mike and the scraggly man walked past her into the living room. They changed shoes quickly enough and sat on the empty couch. Kazemi sat down next to Izuku and pulled her tea mug back towards her. Private lesson? Present Mike asked. I didn't think you were the type to take on personal students, Hurricane. Kazemi rolled her eyes. Considering we've never really talked before, Mike, I doubt you've ever had the necessary data to make an accurate assessment of my character. Besides, Kazemi jabbed her thumb at Izuku. This one's special. He'd have to be to catch the attention of such a high-ranking hero, Mike replied coolly. Oh no, Izuku interjected. I was just lucky, or unlucky. I guess it was a villain fight when we met, but I didn't. Kazemi elbowed him lightly, looking mildly amused. Izuku smiled sheepishly and ducked his head. He's right, a little. We met by chance. But he's a brilliant mind and quick on his feet. Any pro worth their salt would be lucky to have him. Deku-sensei, Izuku squealed under his breath. Kazemi didn't know how to feel about him hiding the fact that the two of them were on first-name basis now. She was mostly indifferent, but she was strangely proud that he had the common sense to do that, as practice for dealing with hostile allies. I taught him that. An annoying voice in her head squealed. The scruffy-looking pro cleared his throat. Kazemi glanced him over. Shit, that was Eraserhead. She should have recognized those goggles sooner. Kazemi raised her eyebrows at him. I'm afraid this is a private matter. He looked pointedly at Izuku. Unless it's a matter of national security, Midoriya can be here, Kazemi said. Mike and Eraser exchanged glances. Kazemi couldn't really read what they meant, but she gathered the two must be close. They looked back at her. Kazemi guessed they came to an agreement. There's an in-person staff meeting today, and Nedzu wants you to attend as well. Kazemi cocked her head. Really? That's it? Why would he dash? And then it clicked. Kazemi started laughing. Present Mike didn't bother to stop his jaw from dropping. Deku-sensei? What is it? Izuku said, staring at his mentor in shock. Don't worry about it, kid. I think I know what the meeting's about. Nedzu just wanted to mess with these two. Or... Kazemi snapped her head up, her expression unreadable. What subjects do you teach? I teach English and Aizawa teaches hero law. He's also one of the homeroom teachers for first years, Mike explained, looking between Hurricane and Eraser nervously. This was not how he pictured this meeting going in the slightest. Either everything he heard about Hurricane was wrong, or she was playing with them. Maybe even both. Kazemi nodded, leaning back. That explains it. I'm always complaining to Nedzu about how I want someone new to debate ethics with, or someone to talk to about English music. Mike blinked. Kazemi stood up suddenly. Why don't the three of us get going? Midoriya and I were almost done for the day anyways. Izuku stood up with his mentor. Kazemi looked at him. Kid, you can go early this time if you want. Just, Kazemi trailed off. Then a vicious grin appeared on her face. Or, you can ask these two some questions. I know you've been fanboying inside this entire time. Shoyuta did not like the sound of that. Hurricane looked malicious, and while the kid seemed nice, the rumors about Hurricane had to come from somewhere. Izuku squealed. Really? Izuku had to stop himself from bouncing in place. Shuta's heart did not tug at that at all. Thank you very much. He was dead inside. Completely dead. Mike spoke up. I'm always happy to talk with one of my listeners. If the kid could tame the legendary Hurricane, he must be nice, right? Besides, Eraser might be your homeroom teacher next year, Kazemi said, taking on a teasing tone. Only Izuku got her softness these days. Nedzu didn't count, he liked it when she was brash. Better get it out of the way now. It really is Eraserhead? I mean, I thought with the googles, oh my god, he's so cool. Izuku whirled around to face Eraser and practically skipped over to him. Shoyuta suddenly understood why Hurricane had such a sadistic expression on her face. The kid was a whirlwind of excitement. He could hear Hurricane cackling and Hisashi full-on belly laughing. He'd punch his friend later. Maybe Hurricane too. She relied on her quirk, so she might not be as competent without it. Izuku felt electric. He couldn't believe his luck. He was meeting Present Mike and Eraserhead. You're really Eraserhead? He said. He was just so excited. Eraserhead grunted, nodding his head. Izuku pulled his notebook out of his back pocket. I have so many questions. How long can you erase for? Can you erase a quirk by looking at a reflection? Has someone with a copy quirk ever erased your quirk? So what happened? How much do you spend on eye drops? Your eyes must need more maintenance given that they're what you activate your quirk with. Oh, what's your capture weapon made of? This fabric woven with some super strong metal, right? I can't believe you teach at UA. You must see so many cool quirks. Oh, your quirk must be super helpful for that. If a student loses control of their quirk or something. Eraser held his hand up, signaling for the kid to stop. Kazemi ceased her cackling. Eraserhead really was the unflappable man she'd heard about. Well, more fun if it's a challenge. Although if he was to be her teaching colleague and Izuku's potential homeroom teacher, she wouldn't do anything that would potentially go too far. Tone it down, kid, Eraser said. I can erase a quirk for over 30 seconds at a time. I don't know what happens with mirrors, but I'm fairly certain I can't erase someone's quirk by looking at their reflection. I also spend way too much on eye drops. Izuku nodded, already scribbling everything down. Kazemi sauntered over to take a peek. You're recreating the old entry? Kazemi said. That was in Volume 8. It's long overdue for an update. Same with Present Mix, if I'm being honest. I was planning to do one in 13, but, well, you remember, Isuka said, barely slowing down. Kazemi nodded. Shoyuta stared at the kid. He has 14 notebooks like this, and he did one on me in Volume 8. How'd you know about me, kid? Or my quirk, for that matter? Footage gets leaked online, usually nothing longer than 30 seconds, and it gets taken down fast, but I try to watch as many as possible before that happens. Out of all the underground pros, you're the most famous. Lots of handmade merch on websites like... Izuku started muttering. It quickly transitioned from merch to something about a secondary quirk. Shoyuta paled. Merch? Hisashi started laughing again, the traitor. Hurricane, meanwhile, seemed to be memorizing his reaction to the concept of Eraserhead merch. Shoyuta pinched the bridge of his nose. Please tell me you didn't buy any, Shoyuta said. If this kid was as much of a fanboy as Hurricane seemed to be implying, Shoyuta was afraid he already knew the answer. Oh? Sorry, the kid said, blushing. Hisashi started laughing again. Hurricane looked mildly surprised. Really? I thought you were an All Might diehard, Hurricane said, still watching the kid's notes. Well, yeah, All Might's the greatest, but this one creator I really like did a series of hoodies for a fundraiser. It all went to vaccine research. I requested an Eraserhead one since I already had her All Might design. I had been budgeting since the fundraiser had been announced, and Eraserhead is the hero I have the best chance of being like. He practically fights Quirkless, and for me, Izuku cut himself off, snapping his notebook closed. He turned an even darker shade of red and quickly rushed towards the door. I think I'll be going now, Kazemi-sensei, he said, shoving his notebook into his backpack and changing his shoes at an almost inhuman speed. Shoyuta studied Hurricane's expression. She seemed almost sad. Izuku, she said. The kid stopped, his hand on the doorknob. Remember what we talked about, kid, and get home safe. I'd rather face a swarm of sentient bees than your mother. Izuku chuckled dryly and turned the knob. I'll text you when I get home. With that, the green-haired fanboy was gone. Hurricane sat back down, taking a moment to sip her tea. Shoyuta stared at her mug. It had a pattern of rainbow cat paws. Not what he expected from the hero with a reputation for being cruel and merciless. Then again, he didn't expect her to have a private student. So, Hisashi said, he's Quirkless. Hurricane immediately glared at him. Yes, is that a problem? Hisashi immediately began shaking his head. Of course not. I just wanted confirmation, is all. Hurricane's gaze softened. Well, he's Quirkless as far as we know. Midoriya could have the world's most obscure activation requirement, be the world's latest bloomer, or... Kazemi looked down. She had to put the idea in their heads, for Izuku's sake. Well, I'll be honest, I'm quite afraid of the world where Midoriya has a trauma-induced quirk. For his sake. She added the last part quietly. Present Mike nodded in understanding. I see. Well, he must be special if he caught your attention without a quirk. Kazemi smirked. Remember the slime villain incident from a while back? Present Mike raised his eyebrows. He's the kid who ran at the guy? Kazemi nodded. The very same. I scolded him a bit for being reckless, but he thought quicker than some of the other pros, and he had to be doing something right to get past a line of police and for heroes. I took a bite out of Slugger's hero license at one of the meetings on the consequences of that day. Kazemi smiled knowingly at the two in front of her. Present Mike was struggling to hold in a laugh. It was great. The prick had it coming. Shoyuta had met the hero known as Slugger a few times. Slugger had come off as egotistical and condescending. The man probably deserved whatever other horrors Hurricane had unleashed on him, so he smiled a little at Hurricane. Kazemi finished the last of her tea. Of course, if it is trauma-induced, I shudder to imagine how traumatic the event must be for it to not have triggered already. He's been bullied enough, and the slime villain incident. Kazemi shook her head. She's done enough. The seed is there. Kids can be cruel, Present Mike offered. Kazemi laughed dryly. If only it were just kids. Honestly, I wish he'd let me sick the lawyers on his entire school system. Do you really think he can get into UA? Eraser asked. Kazemi shrugged. He could definitely pass the recommendation exam, but I know he has his heart get on the standard heroics exam. I haven't told him it's literal robots, but he does understand it's designed mostly for people with flashy quirks. I've also made it very clear to him that if he fails the standard, he can use the sports festival loophole and still be valid. I had to point out to him that's what you did, Eraser. But he accepted the possibility. Sorry, I'm rambling. Mike was able to stop his jaw from dropping this time. The famed Hurricane looked embarrassed. Forgive my rudeness, if it was rude. That is, the kid's rubbing off on me, and if you couldn't tell, it's been a while since I've socialized, for lack of a better term. You're fine, Mike said. I'm a very social person, and I'll still talk your ears off. Hurricane snorted. She stood up again. Well, we have a meeting to get to. Best not keep Nedzu waiting. Chapter 14. Kazemi was silent the whole car ride. She was trying to assess if the two heroes in the front seat bought into her ploy at a trauma quirk story. This one was one of the rare times she was conflicted on how her reputation was serving her. On the one hand, neither hero seemed to expect her to speak. On the other hand, they seemed like genuinely interesting people that she would have liked to get to know. Well, if she accepted Nezu's offer, she would. Kazemi suspected that was Nezu's motivation in sending the pair of them as messengers/chauffeurs. The rat knew her well. Of course, she'd have to talk to the rat to double-check if he was offering what she shout he was offering, but she was very familiar with Nezu's games. Luckily, Mike seemed happy to fill the silence and talk enough for all three of them. Kazemi needed to do little more than supply a reassuring smile here and there, and the blonde was content to chatter away as he drove. Kazemi decided on filing Mike in the like column. She was a little on the fence about Eraserhead, but she held a healthy respect for the man regardless of his personality. She suspected he acted gruffer than he really was on purpose. He wouldn't have become a teacher otherwise, Kazemi suspected. Of course, she could have asked Nezu all about the man and gotten most of the answers, but she was similar to the rat in that she often preferred to get the answers for herself. Perhaps that was the real reason so many pros seemed to be afraid of her at first. She reminded them of Nezu. When they arrived at UA, she got out wordlessly. They were almost inside the doors when she stopped short. "Something wrong, Hurricane?" Eraser said. "Call me Decker. But actually, Mike is the one for this," she said. Mike gulped. He hadn't quite gotten over his intimidation. "Yes?" he said, hiding his nerves. "Could you please come and meet with Midoriya when you get a chance? You're one of his favorite heroes, and while he might deny it, he listens to your show every Friday. He has a lot of questions about your quirk, and it would probably make his week if he got some of them answered." Mike smiled, pleasantly surprised. "I would love to. Thanks for asking." Kazemi nodded. "No problem. I'm really just saving you from getting bombarded in the middle of class," she said, laughing quietly. Mike laughed too, the memory of the enthusiastic greenette still fresh in his mind. "He's actually really good at analyzing quirks. You might get something new out of it. He gave me an idea for a new way to make clouds." Mike and Eraser exchanged glances. "Clouds?" Eraser said. Kazemi kicked herself mentally. She tipped her hand too much. "Well, they're just condensed water vapor and dust. My quirk is basically hydrokinesis on steroids, so it's not that hard for me to use it on things besides liquid water. Clouds are good quirk training for me, but impractical in most combat situations. It does amuse children, though." Kazemi did a mental fist pump when the two seemed to back off. Her quirk was registered as superhydraulics, which referenced her tendency to manipulate the pressure her water was at while not revealing the other aspects of her quirk. "I didn't take you as the type to amuse children, Decker-san," Eraser said. "Well, if I didn't already know from Nezu you became a teacher, I wouldn't have believed it either. Eraserhead has quite the reputation." Decker looked around before leaning towards the other two pros. When she spoke again, it was much quieter. "Besides, I specifically learned to make clouds so I could comfort children after a traumatic rescue. I apply the techniques far more often than I would like." Mike gave her a sympathetic look, whereas Eraser seemed unperturbed. Shit, she was gonna have to learn to think of them in their civilian names, wasn't she? Damn it, she never had this problem in pro heroics, not even in Canada. "I see," Eraser said. "Let's get going," Kazemi said, opening the door. "I have a feeling the meeting will be rather interesting." Chapter 15. Chapter text. Kazemi ignored the stares of everyone around her. It was Nezu's fault for having them fetch her while she was out of uniform. There were 3 empty seats at the meeting table, one of which was between Nezu and All Might. Kazemi decided that would be her seat. She put her head on her right fist and held back a yawn. She looked at the man to her right. He was staring back at her, although his stare was different from the gazes of the others. It was concerned, anxious, and perhaps a little guilty. "Serves him right, considering how long he's avoided talking with me," she thought. Then, fighting one of her famed sadistic grins, she mentally added, "He's not going to get away from me this time. He's cornered now." Oh, that suit is old. Last time he wore that was the interview with that one reporter for the New York Times. I should reread that article sometime. It'll give me ammunition to make fun of Nori. Hey, I got him that tie for Christmas. Oh, if I bring it up, he'll get so embarrassed. Karma's a bitch, Nori, and I am a bitch queen. Most of the meeting passed by in a blur for Kazemi. She kept track of everything that was said, her eyes darting from speaker to speaker, but she never had anything to add. She preferred it that way. It was an excellent way for her to assess the dynamics of her potential coworkers, to see where she could fit in without disrupting anything. It also allowed her to broadcast her carefully learned aura of cold indifference, in case she decided that she didn't want to make friends with them while she worked here. Coincidentally, President Mike spent the majority of that meeting plotting different ways he could to get the famed hurricane to open up and show the others her softer side. The moment Kazemi decided she liked him, she unknowingly signed a death warrant for friendship. All Might was also quiet, only speaking up when he was asked a question directly. The meeting was mostly about plans for the next year's courses, reports on specific students that needed extra help for some reason or another, and a bit of budgeting. She hardly registered it when Nedzu dismissed the non-heroics personnel. She blinked twice before straightening up and turning to the rat on her left. Showtime, she thought. The remaining staff were staring at her curiously. I'm not technically an employee of yours, Nedzu. Should I leave as well? At this point, Kazemi had already figured out Nedzu intended to offer her a teaching job. It wasn't hard. It never was, for her. The rat shook his head, smiling all the while. He had a mask of calm cheer as usual and in direct contrast to Kazemi's. Of course not, Kazemi-san. You're already privy to some of the information we'll be discussing today. And if you accept my offer, it would make sense to have you up to date with your coworkers. Kazemi nodded. It was the answer she expected. Nedzu knew she was smart enough to figure that information out on her own. Her question and his response were performative at best. It was a way to give the others necessary information without having to directly feed it to them. And if they missed the information because they weren't paying attention, well, too bad. So we are discussing what I thought we were. Kazemi nodded. Makes sense. I thought it was odd when this one, Kazemi jabbed her thumb at All Might, showed up in Mustafu. I could say the same about you, Kazemi. It's been a while, the older man said, tipping his head. Well, at first I was just enjoying my day off. I picked up a personal student somehow, so I had to stick around. Nedzu smirked. Oh? I had no idea that was the reason for your prolonged stay. Kazemi rolled her eyes. Pause off, rat. I have dibs until he gets into UA. And even then, you're going to stay away until at least his second year. He needs to build up his self-confidence first. Nedzu laughed quietly. I knew about your student already, of course. I was simply unaware he was in the area. Kazemi looked at him incredulously. Really? Because I'm fairly certain you're playing dumb as a ploy for performative conversation, in an attempt to inform the others as to the content of my character. It's working, of course, and you knew I would call you out on it. Nedzu cackled. You're still blindingly intelligent, Kazemi. I must admit, I extended my invitation partially because I missed daily conversation with you. I did as well, Kazemi said, smiling with her rare soft affection. Well, rare for anyone except Izuku. However, the show's gone on long enough. Our words have done their job. I suggest we clue in the others as to why I'm here now. Oh, but wouldn't it be so much more fun to have them figure it out themselves by listening to our conversation? Kazemi's sadistic grin came out in full force. Oh, I wholeheartedly agree. However, we're bordering on cruelty now. Present Mike, Snipe, and Powerloader seemed to shudder at her words. Kazemi figured those were the three with the common sense to be afraid when the principal was speaking with another sadist. All Might also shuddered, but only because he'd witnessed both of them at full force in their sadism. He knew how bloodthirsty they could get, and the thought of them working together chilled him to his bones. He knew that there was more to Hurricane than her reputation, but he had seen firsthand what she had done to earn that reputation. His feelings on that incident were safely repressed, where not even his therapist's lectures on unhealthy coping methods could breach. Shoyuta also felt a chill at the notion that Hurricane did in fact live up to her reputation, her legendary streak for cruelty and trail of destroyed careers, but he maintained his facade. Hurricane probably wouldn't do anything to UA employees, and even if she tried, Nedzu would stop her. Right? At this moment, Shoyuta realized he now had a date with the strong booze he kept in a safe. At least Hurricane had the common sense to keep Nedzu away from her student. Of course, if she was insisting on it, that meant the kid was probably at least near genius and would wreak havoc once Nedzu got to him, but it was the thought that counted. "Very well, Kazemi," Nedzu said, the gleam in his eyes fading somewhat. "All Might, if you would?" And there it was. Kazemi watched All Might detransform with a sense of nostalgia. The man before her became Yagi Tashinori once again. He coughed, and instinctively she pulled a handkerchief out of her pocket. Tashinori accepted it as he kept coughing. Kazemi tried to ignore the twinge of heartbreak and grief she felt when the light pink of the bloodstains emerged. Thank goodness she invested in high-quality, hyper-absorbent, double-layered handkerchiefs after Izuku's 5th crying session. And yes, they were custom-made. Anything for her pseudo-son. While Nori attempted to cough up what was left of his lungs, Kazemi patted his shoulder and scanned the other members of the meeting. Everyone seemed to be in mild states of shock, although Eraser looked indifferent. Same shit, different day, Kazemi thought, her head imitating Eraser's voice. Nedzu, of course, was scanning their reactions as well. Kazemi looked back at Nori. "Are you done dying?" she asked, raising her eyebrows. Nori rolled his eyes. "You haven't changed at all, Kazi. I would say the same thing about you, but given that a light breeze could take you out, I would be lying." He chuckled dryly and tried to give her the handkerchief back, but she shook her head. He shoved it into his suit pocket, causing the bloody side to flop out unceremoniously. "Okay, so All Might has a transformation quirk. He's coughing up blood. Hurricane apparently already knew about this. What else are we here for?" Eraser said. Kazemi mentally pushed him into the like category. He wasted no time. She ignored the fact that the other teachers/heroes were sent into a further state of shock at him dropping her name. 5 years ago, I was involved in an incident. Tashinori started. Kazemi thought that word was doing some heavy lifting. Incident. The word was a symbol of peace in its own right. We kept it out of the news, but it took a lot out of me. The injuries nearly killed me, and the following surgeries exhausted me further. As it stands, I can barely hold my hero form for more than a few hours each day, and my time is going down. That is why I'm going to be teaching at UA. It would allow me to ease out of heroics somewhat. Nedzu also offered a teaching job to me, Kazemi added. I'm still mostly on the fence about it, although I'm leaning towards a yes. Regardless, it is imperative that we keep this a secret. If villains knew about his other form, if they knew he was growing weaker, Kazemi scowled at the table. Well, we'd have to find a new symbol of peace, and for the love of all that is holy, it cannot be endeavor. Tashinori started coughing into his new handkerchief again. Kazemi shook her head fondly, patting his shoulder yet again. If she ignored the blood, it was just like old times, where she could easily fluster the man with her tamer jokes. He'd gotten used to some of them, but she was still able to catch him off guard a few times a day, and he still fell for everything Gran threw at him. What's wrong with endeavor? I mean, I don't like the guy that much, but he's a fine hero, Snipe said. Kazemi narrowed her eyes at him. Tashinori elbowed her lightly. Kazemi glared at him for a second, but took his cue to soften her message. I personally despise the man, but that aside, his approach to heroics is downright despicable. He makes up for what he lacks in charisma with his sheer volume of casework. He's needlessly violent with criminals, and while his quirk is ill-suited for most rescue work, he barely pays attention to civilians during combat, which goes against even the most basic of rescue training, the kind that all heroes receive. I may be sadistic, but I do what I do when I catch gross violations of ethics. I've destroyed a lot of things, but never without purpose, never when it could have been avoided. He does what he does because he just doesn't care. She was practically spitting at the end of that statement. I also have serious questions about the ethics and legality of his marriage, but I can't get any evidence right now, other than that he once tried to talk me into a date with him because our quirks might mix well together. Kazemi cleared her throat. But yeah, Endeavor would make a terrible symbol. Honestly, Hawks or Best Jeanist would be fine. Mirko's a little brash, but that aids her relatability somewhat. She'd work too. Despite my problems with the idea of a symbol, she glared pointedly at Toshinori, I cannot deny that it currently has a net positive impact on society. Toshinori sighed. At least you didn't break out the PowerPoint presentation, he muttered. Kazemi smiled deviously. What was that, Nori? You want me to give my infamous 3 hours long presentation on all the flaws with your symbol plan? Flaws that I've been able to point out since the beginning, complete with colorful slides, a quiz, and, given the audience size, snacks. Toshinori groaned and sunk into his seat. Kazemi snickered. Too easy. I'm surprised the two of you are so close, a new voice said. Kazemi glanced at the source, A13, and kept her expression neutral. We shared mentors, she stated simply, and while our personalities are remarkably different, there is a shared trauma bond between all who endured Gran Torino's combat training. Nori didn't even bother to hide the shudder. Kazemi grinned. You know, I think he still has a teaching license dash. Absolutely not. I cannot deal with you, him, and Nedzu in the same building. Kazemi cackled. Not my fault you fell for his pretending to die trick every time. Nori. Toshinori ignored her for the most part. Anyways, while I am in this form, please refer to me as Yagi Toshinori. Kazi, if you would stop calling me Nori in my stronger form, that would work wonders as well. Kazemi waved dismissively at him. I'm not stupid. I've helped you keep this secret for almost as long as I've known you. Besides, if I really wanted to destroy you, you know I would find a better way than that. Nori put his head in his hands. Why is that oddly comforting? He groaned. Because you know my destructive prowess is on your side. For the most part, Kazemi replied. Hang on. I want to hear more about all, sorry Yaga-san. Falling for the pretending to die thing. Present Mike spoke up. Kazemi opened her mouth, a shit-eating grin on her face. Before she could say anything, Toshinori elbowed her in the stomach. Hard. Ow, she wheezed. You know, for a skeleton, you're pretty lively. And mean. Like you're one to talk, Toshinori hissed. Kazemi made a show of opening and closing her mouth, smacking her lips slightly, although she was still rubbing her side. Nedzu clapped his paws together. Kazemi Toshinori, as much as I love watching you two bicker, almost as much as I love watching Toshinori squirm, I believe there's something else you two need to say. Toshinwar looked confused while Kazemi groaned. Did you seriously invite both of us to teach at UA because you wanted us to make up? Kazemi said, facepalming. Nedzu smiled innocently. Holy crap, he did, Toshinori muttered. The two titans of the heroics industry turned towards each other, to really and truly look at each other for the first time in almost 7 years. They were polar opposites, completely alike in some regards and complete opposites on everything else. He was tall and thin, she was short and rounded. Where his hands were giant, hers were tiny. She had unnaturally colored hair and eyes. His were the American ideal. Her hair was unstyled and a little unkempt. His was well-styled and well cared for. When she was quiet and observant, he was the center of attention. When she was in the spotlight, he watched quietly, making sure she was well received. While he was making his moves openly, she would disguise her true attack until it was too late for her opponent. He would be loud and cheery for the media. She would be sarcastic and blunt. Whenever he was comforting victims by reassuring them they were safe, she was amusing them with funny clouds and silly jokes. When one's fury was loud and roaring, the other was quietly angry, waiting for their turn. Both were much more complex than their hero personas, and both had done that on purpose. When one would go for a direct assault, the other would flank. Both cared more for the safety of civilians than they did about capturing bad guys, but both were powerful enough that they almost never had to choose. They both had some of the fastest attacks in the industry, after all. Both were amazing at rescue work. Both couldn't stand for injustice against anyone, whether it be petty thievery or discrimination. Both were constantly in danger of working too hard, becoming lost in their goals and forgetting to take care of themselves. Both came from humble origins, rising to greatness and a legacy older than the both of them combined. And both had lost someone dear at the hands of All for One. Kazemi sighed. Then she reached out her hand. Tashinori took it. "I'm sorry I pushed you away," Kazemi said. "Me too," Tashinori replied, staring at her hand. He saw the familiar bumps by her fingernails and knew that she must not have had time to take care of her hands after her last Quirk training session. She always pushed herself. Kazemi let her fear show in her eyes as Tashinori met them again. "Promise me you'll stop that. It might be too late to mend things with Sir, but it's not too late with me. Promise me you'll take better care of yourself, if not for your own sake, for mine, for Shimura's, for Madrid's, for the sake of your stupid symbol plan." Tashinori laughed at the familiar line. "You have to take better care of yourself too, you know? I can see your hands." Kazemi stared at him incredulously. "I have a skin condition, Tashinori. You're trying to turn yourself into a martyr." "Oh, I had my stomach and a lung torn out. Whoopsie-daisy. Guess I'll go back on patrol now. Honestly, it's a miracle you're not the symbol of pieces." She waved her free hand wildly. Tashinori wheezed at her impression of him. It was as terrible and as scathing as ever. Kazemi turned to Nedzu. "I'll take your job offer, but I have a few requests. Number 1, I get to rotate between the years when it comes to heroics. 2, I want to be available to help teach English. And number 3, Kazemi squeezed Tashinori's hand before continuing. "Number 3, every single person in this room is going to help me force this man to take better care of himself, because that is what it will take. Publicly shaming him, a task force that can take turns, and people willing beat him into it if necessary. And I do mean beat, his skull is thick enough. He can take it." As she spoke, Kazemi met the eyes of everyone in the room one by one. "I tried for years and years to drag this stubborn fool into taking care of himself, but he always insisted on being there so that people could live without fear. I would always argue other heroes could do that, but he would argue that if he couldn't be everywhere, neither could they. That it wouldn't be fair to other heroes if he did less than he could. I eventually gave up because I got tired of watching it. Now I know exactly how to get him to comply. Nothing hurts him worse than letting a group of people down, so that's going to have to be the stakes, although I'll be doing most of the work. As much as I would like to force him to retire, not even I have that power." Tashinori chuckled at her skull comment, but was otherwise quiet. It was an old joke. It was the line she used when he complained about Gran hitting him on the head. She would also usually follow it up with a "you deserve it for being an idiot anyways." He watched Kazemi closely as she spoke. She had an intensity in her eyes he hadn't seen in years. She looked as determined as she did the day Madrid died, as determined as she got when she was ranting about how she was going to fix society one broken system at a time, as determined as she was when she resolved to destroy the career of a selfish hero who would get civilians killed in the long run. She had the force of her namesake in her eyes, and he was reminded how he always thought she was going to hold one for all next. That was before he found out about Elemental Storm, of course. Kazemi looked Tashinori in the eyes again. "This man may be an idiot, but he's a good idiot. He's given up a lot. I would like to see him retire with confidence in the next generation of heroes." Tashinori's eyes watered. He smiled fondly at his old friend. "Oh, I'm also going to have to sit in on most of his classes. This man is incompetent at pretty much everything except heroics. I expect teaching will not be the exception to the rule. I do think he can be trained to be halfway decent, though." As Tashinori started hacking again, his only thought was should have seen that coming. Chapter 16. The rest of the meeting passed by without incident, to Tashinori's relief. Nedzu agreed to Kazemi's demands, saying it was for Toshinori's own good, as well as your peace of mind. It came as little surprise to him that the rest agreed to her demands as well. Kazemi was at her most persuasive when she was being honest, a fact the younger woman knew well. It didn't hurt that she was begging them to help her protect the man who was likely the #1 hero when they were children themselves. Even Eraserhead agreed, although Toshinori suspected it was somewhat begrudgingly. He may not be the smartest person in the room, but he wasn't blind either. He pretended to be dumber than he actually was, a trick he picked up from years of being around Kazemi and Gran. Toshinori hoped that he and Eraser could work past whatever differences they had, but he also knew he might have to use Kazemi as a buffer. He figured it would be payback for all the times she had used him as a human shield when she debuted as a pro. It would also be payback for the fact that she spent the rest of the meeting laying on his shoulder. When he complained about it, she raised her eyebrows and stared him down. It was somehow still terrifying, even though she was sideways and clinging to him like a koala. Toshinori decided to chalk that up to all the times he'd been on the receiving end of that stare before getting blasted with cold water. It's the right of the short to lay on the tall, Nori. I haven't seen you in 6 years. I'm overdue. I'm also still mad I found out from Sir that you nearly died. Complain again and I'll start telling embarrassing stories. He face-bombed immediately afterward. Typical Kazi, he thought, but he avoided moving his left side too much. He drew the line at Nedzu laying on him as well, though. Thankfully, Kazemi backed him up on this. Back off, rat. I have vengeance to wreak, you do not. Wait your turn, you heathen. Admittedly, that was mortifying, but it was better than being a human pillow for two sadists, even if he was rather fond of both of them. Despite the human storm laying on him, he was able to get a decent idea of what his schedule would look like at UA and where he could easily disappear without students following him. He, Kazemi, and Cementos worked out some decent plans to obscure people's vision of him during emergencies. Kazemi also tried to impose hard limits on what he could do outside of class, but he told her he wouldn't be able to just ignore cries for help. Then perish, she said. He immediately started coughing. He was going to have to ask her for another handkerchief. No, seriously, you'll have to learn to trust that other heroes in the area can help. If you try to function at your current rate of casework while working at UA, you'll just get yourself killed. Cut back, or so help me, I will get them to remake your hero costume out of colored bubble wrap. Before she finished talking, she pulled another handkerchief out of her pocket and handed it to him without missing a beat. She was right, of course, he needed it. He was coughing again. I know you're joking, but the fact that you could really do that if you wanted to do scares me, he said. Kazemi shrugged. By the way, you're going to start ordering the same custom handkerchiefs as me. I initially requested them because my student and his mother have infinite tears, but now I'm starting to suspect the three of you will run me out of house and home. By your own, you have the money. To both his delight and horror, some of the other heroes were starting to laugh at Kazemi's antics. Delight because finally other people were starting to see how amazing his old friend really was, and horror because, as usual, he was the butt of the joke. As much as things change, Kazi stays the same, that should be the saying, he thought. He noticed that the first time Present Mike laughed at her words, she almost did a double take. She still wasn't used to people seeing past her reputation so quickly. It made him kind of sad, knowing that meant she must be lonely, but he was honestly just happy to have his old friend back. Even if she was mad at him and was going to force him to slow down. Granted, she was clinging to him rather desperately. It made her less threatening than usual. Present Mike also apparently escorted her to this meeting, so it was probable that her mystique or whatever had worn off for him faster than usual. He wondered if her student was the greenette they had both saved. If she had picked him up where Toshinori had failed. If he was better for One for All or Elemental Storm. How many tears Kazemi had wiped away because of him. Toshinori knew he failed as All Might that day, but that was how he and Kazemi worked. When one of them screwed up, the other would fix it. It was usually Kazemi cleaning up after him, but he could think of a few times Kazemi had gotten scared of something she had said and sent him to make sure she hadn't been taken the wrong way. He honestly wasn't quite sure how he'd managed without her and Sir these past 5 years. He was beginning to suspect he hadn't. The meeting ended quickly enough. Kazemi pulled him out of his seat the second they were dismissed. She handled him more delicately than she used to, but Toshinori still felt manhandled. "We need to talk in private," she whispered. He nodded. There was much they couldn't discuss in front of others. Their quirks and the other reason Nedzu had offered them jobs. The hunt for successors. Someone who believed in justice as much as they did, who wanted the world to be kinder than it was. Someone with the determination to do it. And so they walked into a classroom together. Chapter 17. Chapter text. Kazemi glared at her old friend. He looked at her, tired. "This is about the green-haired boy, isn't it?" he said. Kazemi glared harder. "You left him on a roof, Toshinori. You crushed his dreams and left him on a roof." The man at least still had enough common sense to look ashamed. He stared at the floor, not moving a muscle. "I don't think I can ever forgive you for that, you know? You were his idol, his source of comfort in the face of bullying and discrimination, and you left him on a roof," she snarled. "I don't think I can ever apologize enough. To you or him. I failed to live up to my own ideals that day, your ideals, Nana's or Madrid's. You've destroyed heroes for less, and what I said to him, when he asked me if he could be a hero without a quirk, I thought back to how I felt when I was his age. How badly I wanted to be a hero. How that hurt me until Nana gave me the power. I thought it might be better for him if he was let down gently." "Let down gently? What part of that was gentle?" Kazemi hissed. "He cried so badly when trying to tell me he couldn't speak. I had to ask yes or no questions." Toshinori winced. "I was blinded by self-loathing. I thought that if I couldn't even save Nana or Madrid or myself, then what right did I have to tell someone so young what it took to be a hero? I watched you save him from the slime villain the second time, by the way. When I saw him step forward, even though I was well beyond my time limit, I almost jumped in myself. He was so brave despite his lack of power. Then I saw you jumping in after him. You didn't even know he was quirkless, and yet you acted faster than you would have had he not put himself at risk. I would have offered him one for all right then, and there had you not taken it upon yourself to protect the young man." Toshinori knelt in front of Kazemi. "I heard what you said to those heroes through the water. I was just as bad as them, if not worse. I watched you leave the scene with him. I knew you'd take him home. As much as I wanted to apologize to that young man, I was terrified of facing you after what I said to him. What I did. You'd know how I failed our mentors again." Kazemi wiped her hand across her face, holding back tears. Her mind betrayed her, thinking of people she had loved and lost. "Damn it, every time I think you've gone beyond the point of reason, you remind me that despite your mistakes, you're still a good person. One of the best. You remind me of the better days when we still had our mentors, that we've always had to watch out for each other, that you never expect forgiveness, even when you really should. It doesn't hurt that Izuku already forgave you a bit, and I'm fairly certain he'd be a sobbing mess if you told him what you told me here today." She crouched down in front of him. Toshinori looked back up at her. He put his hand on her cheek. "His room was nothing but All Might merch, by the way," Kazemi said, letting herself cry again. "I think he's a bigger fan than Sir ever could be. He still has the bedspread, but he's swapped out some of the posters now. I don't blame him. It turns out he had a limited edition present mic poster. Signed. He won a radio call-in contest when he was 8. Toshinori chuckled along with her. "I would love to meet him. He's the next wielder of Elemental Storm, isn't he?" Kazemi closed her eyes, leaning into her friend's hand. She suddenly felt like speaking in English like they used to when they wanted to annoy Gran. The bruised temples were worth it to make Madrid laugh at their antics. English was always something the two bonded over. "That's the thing. I had no intention of getting this attached to him, but does he ever manage to surpass my expectations? I told him the truth about my quirk because I'd rather him not suddenly manifest powers when I'm gone, without me there to bully the government, but I told him I would try to find someone else if he'd rather pursue his dreams. I don't know if I can, though. He's really the perfect hero at heart. He has all of your best traits and mine, and some of our worst too. He reminds me a bit of a young sir as well, just for good measure. They both laughed. Both were crying too. Sir has a successor in mind for One for All, by the way, Kazemi said. I don't know if he told you. Toshinori shook his head. Do they attend UA? Kazemi nodded. He's a third year, has excellent mastery of his quirk, work experience with Sir, and a good heart. I'd like to meet him first, but I trust Sir's judgment. I hear he's one of UA's brightest stars, even if his humor is a bit lacking. You and Sir were always the better judges of that. Literally everyone is better at jokes than you, Nori. The two heroes laughed, cried, hugged, and thought of better times. Meanwhile, a third was in the vents, desperately wishing he hadn't let his curiosity get the better of him. What could make the famed Hurricane be so fond of a man he was starting to loathe? He was also kind of wishing he wasn't as fluent in English as he was. The price of being friends with Hisashi for so long. Oh man, if Hisashi knew what kind of mess Shoyuta had overheard, he'd have himself a laughing fit. The worst part was he was actually starting to like Yagi as a person. Aizawa Shoyuta, Eraserhead, famed hard-ass, felt bad for the two of them, and that kid Midoriya as well. Of course, it would be illogical to reveal to any of them why felt that way and how he came across that knowledge. Shoyuta sighed inaudibly. It was going to be a long school year, and then he heard something that shocked him to his core. It's gotten worse, by the way, Hurricane started. There was a beat of silence. Quirkless discrimination has gotten worse since you were quirkless. The day you met him, Izuku was told to kill himself by his former childhood friend. You couldn't have known that, but that's the reason I was angrier than I normally would have been about the fact that you left him on a roof. If he had actually done it, the world would have lost one of the most beautiful minds it had ever known to heartless fools. I would have lost the closest thing I'll ever have to a son before I even saw his face. Shoyuta heard a sob from the older man, who apparently used to be quirkless. Shoyuta was more concerned about the suicide baiting, and decided to file the other revelation under shit I'll deal with later. It's not your fault, Nori, but I thought you deserved to know. You and I need to do better. Our society has gotten so broken, and we haven't even been trying to fix it. Also, the one who told him that, it was the second hostage from that day. If I knew what I knew now, I would have let the media harass that boy, maybe worse. Does that make me a bad person? No. Angry and hateful, yes. But I don't think you could truly be a bad person, even if you tried. You're too kind. You'd lose your resolve the second you came across a wounded cat. The two in the room below him laughed, but Shoyuta could tell it was pained. That bubbly, excitable kid from earlier, the one who definitely didn't warm Shuta's heart with that smile, had been told to kill himself for something beyond his control. Then later that day apparently had his dreams crushed by his idol, and nearly died at least once that same day. And it all made Shoyuta sick. It explains why he suddenly got closed off when he mentioned quirklessness earlier, why Hurricane got so defensive of him after Hisashi asked about it, he thought. Did everyone the kid met that day besides Hurricane get hit with the asshole stick? At least All Might has the excuse of shitty mental health, despite how bad of an excuse that is. He wanted to punch a wall. He wanted to throw up. He wanted to hold that kid close. He wanted Hisashi to tell the kid everything would be alright. He wanted to hear that kid ask a million questions about his quirk, and everyone else's too. It was illogical, irrational, and yet Shoyuta got the feeling that illogical and irrational followed the green-haired kid around like the plague.